The Impact Fee Workshop of March the 6th, 2008 will please come to order. Will you please stand and...
Just in time.
Would you please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good afternoon. I've been asked several times how long this is going to last, and it's going to last as long as you want it to last. We're going to open it up, and at the end, the public can have conversations or say what they would like about what we're going to hear. And I'll turn it over at this point for a presentation for staff overview of the impact fees. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Keating. I'm County Community Development Director. Actually, for a workshop, this is pretty unusual. Usually when we have consultants here, I have the consultants do the work. But in this case, we have gotten in a couple of reports that are in response to the initial report that the consultant gave. So it was a general consensus that I would give an overview, and then we would hear from the two groups that have compiled reports, and then hear from the consultant.
Okay.
And the bad news with all of that is I do have a PowerPoint. But it's a relatively brief PowerPoint. I'm going to try to go through it, and basically my objective is to give an overview of impact fees so I can provide an overall perspective for the workshop. And probably the first thing that needs to be done is to define what an impact fee is. And an impact fee is a one-time capital charge for new development. Existing development does not pay impact fees. And an impact fee should cover the cost of constructing the new capital facility capacity that's needed to accommodate new development. And really what an impact fee does, it implements capital improvement element and capital improvement program improvements that are identified by a jurisdiction. What an impact fee isn't is a tax. It is not a tax, and there's a pretty big difference between a tax and a fee. And an impact fee, being a fee, has to have certain characteristics, and it has to provide a benefit to the fee payer, and the benefit needs to be proportional to the fee. A tax does not have that requirement, and you see that all the time. Everyone pays different levels of taxes but gets the same amount of service. That really can't happen with an impact fee. An impact fee has to have a close relationship between the amount of fee paid and the benefit that the fee payer receives. In Florida, there are a couple of bases, a couple of principles that need to be adhered to in preparing impact fees. Basically, it's both the state statutes and court decisions, and the court decisions relating to constitutional requirements that need to be met in implementing an impact fee. And there are some legal principles that definitely have to be met in establishing an impact fee, and the major legal principle is what's called the dual rational nexus test. And basically that means that, first of all, the fee needs to be proportional to need. So basically the fee that a fee payer pays needs to be directly proportional to the amount of demand for capital facilities that fee payer is creating. And there also needs to be a direct relationship between the fee payer pays and the benefit that he receives. And that's one of the reasons why we have districts with our traffic impact fee, to make sure that that benefit is specifically identified from a geographic perspective. Another thing that's important, the state enacted impact fee legislation a couple years ago, and one requirement of that legislation is that fees need to be based on the most recent and localized data, so that's an important consideration. In order to establish an impact fee or to modify an impact fee, there needs to be documented information. There needs to be objective criteria. There needs to be a defendable methodology done. And that means there needs to be a detailed study done to document actually the need for the fee and the amount of the fee. And that study needs to address the need for capital facilities, the cost of those facilities, the proportionate share of costs, and the maximum fee per unit of development. It's also important to note that the governing body always has the option of imposing fees less than the amount that's determined to be appropriate. You can't establish fees higher than what is justified, but you can establish fees that are lower. There are two basic methodologies for doing impact fee ordinances. There's a consumption-based methodology and an improvements-based methodology. I think most impact fees are done using the consumption-based methodology, and that's the methodology that's been used here in the county to establish our impact fees over the years. And a consumption-based impact fee methodology identifies the amount of capacity that a unit of demand is actually going to use up, and it assigns a cost based on that. One of the advantages of a consumption-based impact fee is it doesn't matter how much development occurs over a period of time. Growth could be 5% or it could be 50%, but a consumption-based methodology is imposing a fee based on the increment of capacity needed by each amount of development. So it's not dependent upon the amount of growth that occurs over time. An improvements-based methodology is different. It involves coming up with a capital improvements program, a set of improvements that will be done over a period of time, and basing the fee on that. And I think generally it's recognized that the better of the two methodologies is a consumption-based impact fee methodology. Really, impact fees up front seem pretty simple. Really, an impact fee is determined based on the amount of demand by a land use, time the unit cost of replacing the capacity that's used up, minus the credit. So it's pretty simple in theory. It gets a lot more detailed actually in practice. There are requirements for using impact fee revenue that's generated. The fees must be spent on the facilities for which they're collected. We segregate impact fees by accounts. The money is not mingled. We're very diligent in doing that. Impact fees can be used only for capacity producing capital improvements. They can't be used for operations and maintenance. That's something that other types of revenues have to be collected for. The impact fees need to be spent in a reasonable amount of time. And generally, the courts, I think, have come up with a time frame of about 6 years. And as I said before, based on the dual rational nexus test, they need to be spent in benefit areas. Now, for most of our fees, the benefit area is the entire county, but some fees, particularly traffic impact fees, we have different smaller geographic benefit areas. This slide's a little dated, but it does show throughout Florida where revenue is generated in terms of the different types of impact fees. And as you can see, back a few years ago was transportation where most of the fees were collected, And I think that's probably still true today. That's really kind of a general overview of impact fees as a whole. Let me just real quickly go through impact fees as related to Indian River County. We've had impact fees for a long time. Actually, I think we were in the first generation to establish impact fees, and that was back in 1986 that the county first established just traffic impact fees. And we had just traffic impact fees for a number of years. And we last updated the traffic impact fees in 2004. Then 2005, based on a directive by the board, 8 new impact fees were put in place. So there's a total of 9 impact fees right now, and of those 9, 7 are enforced countywide, and 2 are just in the unincorporated county. Of course, I do need to give you the caveat that fire rescue is imposed countywide except for the town of Indian River Shores that has its own public safety operation. I think, you know, the reason that we're here today is because an impact fee update has been done. And it's important to understand why an impact fee update was conducted. And first is because in the last few years, there's been a significant increase in land cost, and there's also been a significant increase in overall construction costs. And there's also a recognition that we need to relook at our level of service standards. There are also a couple of other reasons why we had to initiate an impact fee study update. One is that in the county's current impact fee rules that are part of the county's land development regulations, it requires the county at least every 3 years to update its impact fees. But what trumps the 3-year requirement is the interlocal agreement that the county entered into with the school district. And that required by the end of the first year, and the first year ended in July 1, 2006, because the effective date for the current impact fee ordinance we have now was July 2005. That interlocal agreement specifies that we would initiate an update within 1 year. So that's why it was pretty quick on the heels of the 2005 impact fee adoption that we started right in on this impact fee update. And just to give you those time frames, it was May 2005 that the last impact fee ordinance was adopted. Now, those impact fees became effective in July 2005. Consistent with the provision in the school district Board of County Commissioners interlocal agreement, the county did initiate this update back in July 2006. And in October of that year, the county retained Duncan and Associates, and you'll be hearing from them a little later today in this workshop. And they started work on this update. And after doing a lot of work and coordinating with staff, there was a workshop held in May 2007 where Duncan and Associates presented the initial results of their update. And actually, that workshop precipitated a lot of comments, and there subsequently has been 2 reports that have been generated that actually are in response to the original Duncan report. There's the Chamber of Commerce Task Force report that was released in January of this year, and there was also the Treasure Coast Builders report that was released in January of this year. And you're going to hear presentations on both of those reports as part of this workshop. After those presentations, then you'll hear a report from Duncan and Associates, who will give you a little more information on the impact fee update as a whole, and also actually respond to the two reports on their initial report. With that, I just want to call everyone's attention to where a lot of these materials can be accessed. On the county's website, which is www.ircgov.com, we have all of the backup material for this meeting today, which includes the agenda, the Chamber of Commerce Task Force report, the Treasure Coast Builders report, and also a response to those reports from Duncan and Associates. Also on that website, there is a link where you can get to the county's land development regulations and our impact fee ordinances, which can show you what our current impact fee is and what our current impact fee rules are. So with that, that's the end of my general overview, and I tried to be brief.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions of Bob? Thank you. The Impact Fee Task Force, presentation of Impact Fee Task Force report.
Good afternoon. My name is Penny.
Is your mic on?
Down at the bottom.
There's a green right here.
Oh, I see. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Penny Chandler. I'm with the Indian River County Chamber of Commerce. In June of last year, the agenda for the Board of County Commissioners included an item to establish an impact fee task force. That day, the commissioners voted not to adopt a draft resolution to assemble an impact fee committee under the auspices of the county, but instead at that meeting, the chambers were asked to initiate and facilitate an impact fee task force. And although it's been referred to as the chambers impact fee task force, it was really not. It was really a task force that the chambers were asked to put together and facilitate. It was not initiated by the chambers. In July of 2007, we identified a cross-section of people and invited them to participate. Groups and government officials received their letter of invitation to participate, were asked to designate one single person from that group to serve as their representative for the sake of continuity. The Impact Fee Task Force was not a sunshine law committee. It was anticipated that the task force would carry out its function within 6 months. The first meeting took place in late August, August 28, 2007. The task force was asked to review and make recommendations to the County Commission in regard to the recent impact fee report and recommendations set forth by Duncan and Associates as commissioned by the county. The Indian River County Community Development and Duncan and Associates were asked to work with the task force as additional resources, which they did. I'd like to identify those who were members of the task force. Maria Aguilar, town manager representing the town of Orchid. In November, she was replaced by Deb Branwell. Chris Bieber, representing commercial banking. Chris is with Indian River National Bank. Andy Bowler was asked to take part in the task force. He represented affordable housing, and he is with Habitat for Humanity. Robert Bradshaw, town manager, represented the town of Indian River Shores. Brian Curley represented commercial development. He is with PNS Properties. Sherry Fitzgerald represented the City of Vero Beach. She is in the City of Vero Beach Planning Office. Bob Keating with Indian River County Community Development represented the Indian River County government. Chip Landers was a representative for residential brokers. He represented Realtors Association of Indian River County. Dr. Dan McIntyre represented the Indian River County School Board. Chuck Meckling represented the Indian River County Chamber. Chuck is with Point West. Al Minner represented City of Sebastian. He is their city manager. Honey Manous was the representative of the Indian River Neighborhood Association. Jason Nunemaker, the city manager, City of Fellsmere. Nancy Offit, Treasure Coast Builders Association. Joe Paladin represented the Growth Awareness Committee. Peter Robinson represented the Indian River County Economic Development Council. He is with Laurel Homes. Terry Torres represented commercial brokers. He is with Bird Realty Group. Don Wright represented the Sebastian River Area Chamber of Commerce. Frank Watanabe is a certified traffic engineer, and Frank is employed by Neil Schaefer. Beth Mitchell, who is with the Sebastian River Area Chamber, and myself facilitated the Impact Fee Task Force.
And I'm Beth Mitchell. I'm the director of the Sebastian River Area Chamber of Commerce. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the process. Initially, our meetings of the task force took place every other week beginning on August 28th, 2007, and we had 11 meetings that went through January 8th. As an update, we had another meeting 2 weeks ago, and I will address the results of that meeting in a minute. During that time, the task force had presentations by Clancy Mullen, Duncan Associates. Bob Keating was with us. Jason Brown. Joe Baird came to our meetings. Wayne Kleinstiver from Kleinstiver and Associates. I think Wayne is in the audience. And Kirk Sorensen, financial economist with Government Solutions. The task force was broken up in 2 subcommittees that reviewed sections of the July 2007 Duncan report. The subcommittees used whatever means were appropriate and available to them to gather additional information and additional data, analyze the findings, and they developed a consensus from the individual subcommittee recommendations. The task force reviewed and addressed the sections of the report that they believed to be most significant. Those sections addressed by the subcommittees were presented back to the full task force. Subcommittees addressed the following sections of the report: traffic, schools, parks, libraries, and law enforcement. The following sections of the report were not addressed: corrections, public buildings, solid waste, and fire rescue. We created an additional section that was entitled Quantifying the Impact. We reviewed a number of articles, publications, and reports, and those included, of course, Duncan and Associates report, the Indian River County Impact Fee Ordinance, the Impact Fee Update from 2007, the 2006 Florida Impact Fee Task Force report, the Wall Street Journal. There was an article in the News Journal Online News, Indian River County Impact Fee Analysis by Kurt Sorensen, and a draft St. Lucie County Impact Fee Ordinance. Penny?
The members of the task force should be commended for their time, energy, and commitment to get the job done in a meaningful manner and present recommendations back to the commissioners as had been requested. Our meetings typically lasted over 2 hours in length, and we averaged meeting like every 2 weeks. There were hundreds of volunteer man-hours that went into the task force meetings, as well as subcommittees that broke off from the task force to do their own work and come back and report. The group openly discussed the representation that had been invited to participate at the first meeting, and subsequently invited others to participate. Habitat was among them. No others were identified to add to the task force at that or any other meeting. Process and procedure were discussed at each meeting, and a schedule discussed and distributed at all the meetings. Although there were a variety of opinions discussed, the group was respectful of one another and of all opinions, and all the opinions were heard. Minutes were taken at each of the meetings, and those minutes were distributed to each task force member for their input and corrections. While the minutes are not verbatim, they do provide a record of all of the discussions, the comments, concerns, ideas, and opinions of the task force members. At no time during the process was anyone contacted by the public or the media to attend any meetings, and no one would ever have been denied access to any of those meetings. In November, we sent a letter to the Commission stating that we would complete a draft by the end of November and provide that draft to staff for their review and comment. That was sent to staff prior to the December holiday. We also noted in that letter that we anticipated that our final document with recommendations would be completed in December and a report made to the Commission in early January, and we were able to do that. Many of the task force members are inclined to maintain a meeting structure and a meeting schedule to remain updated on the issues. Once you reach this learning curve, there's a temptation to keep right on going because you have the information at hand. Go ahead.
And now our final recommendations. First, for each subcommittee section, our task force considered the recommendation of the subcommittee and then voted. The City of Vero Beach representative abstained in voting on every item, and in some of our votes, we had several members who had to leave the meeting and didn't participate. But here were the results. On the transportation section, the motion was made to maintain the current rate for impact fees, and that motion passed 12-0 with one abstention. The school subsection were the same results, maintain the current rate for impact fees, 12-0 with one abstention. We had the same results on the park subcommittee, and that recommendation was to maintain the current rate for impact fees. We also had the same results with the library subsection. Again, the recommendation was to maintain the current rate for impact fees, and that passed 12-0 with one abstention. And the same held true for libraries. When we reached the law enforcement subcommittee section, the motion was to accept the consultant's report and increase the fees accordingly. That motion passed 6-4 with two abstaining. And the last subsection was quantifying the impact. The recommendation, the motion was to look at not only the increase of fees, but also the current impact fees and how they impact creation of jobs and the profitability of new commercial facilities. And that motion passed 10-0 with two abstentions. As I mentioned earlier, we met again on February 26th as a follow-up and to discuss today's workshop. At that meeting, it was unanimously agreed that we would add one more recommendation, and the task force unanimously supports and requests that the Board of County Commissioners visit creative solutions to meeting future infrastructure needs. And there were no abstentions and no one voted in opposition. This concludes our report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you want to give a definition of what creative, what did you call it, creative what?
It was called Creative Solutions. And what we meant by that, during our subcommittee meetings, there were times, and if you look back in some of the reports that we submitted to you, several of the subcommittees came up with alternative ideas, suggestions, and what methods for the county to look at in terms of projects in the future. I think that we all recognize that it is a different time than it was a couple of years ago.
Thank you. Treasure Coast Builders Association presentation of impact fee analysis report. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can we have your name and
Certainly.
please for the record?
My name is Kirk Sorensen. I have a few slides here I'd like to go through relative to the proposed update on the Indian River County impact fees. First, let me just indicate I was retained by the Treasure Coast Builders to take a look at to conduct a technical review of the Duncan and Associates impact fee update completed in 2007. I'm sorry. As part of this analysis, we did go back and we met with staff and reviewed many of the documents generated by the various county departments in support of the findings in the Duncan and Associates impact fee update. As a precursor, let me first say that we have the most and the highest respect for Duncan Associates and Dr. Nicholas. Both groups, both team members have contributed a tremendous amount of knowledge to the industry of impact fee calculations and methodology. When you deal with impact fees, our position has always been the fees really need to be both right and correct. When I say they should be right, we feel that they should be right relative to the current economic times. These being very uncertain and tenuous times in the local economy, it can be considered prohibitive to add additional fees to the cost of a new home or cost of a new business for the residents of Indian River County. And Bob, if you want to go to the first slide. The majority of the changes that had occurred since 2005 were based on the transportation or the traffic and the school impact fee categories. So in an interest to save a little time today, my presentation will really focus on those two impact fee categories. Several of the assumptions, I believe, used in the 2005 update as presented by Tyndall Oliver were inaccurate, but yet they were carried over to the 2007 update. So although the methodology, in our opinion, is correct as presented by Duncan, we feel that several of the data components and several of the assumptions within the study either are misleading or utilize outdated data or can be updated with more current information. The economic concern that we have with the fees is the fact that they will, in fact, add an undue burden, as I mentioned, to the cost of a family house or residence. And it's a misnomer to think that impact fees really don't just affect newcomers. They affect everybody. They affect the people living in Indian River County. They affect those that want to move out of a rental unit and buy their own home. It affects those that are employed and may want to start their own business, those that have their own businesses and may want to expand those businesses. So, you know, when you consider the total economic impact of the additional cost associated with buying a house or starting a business, you need to consider the impact of those living in the county as well as those considering relocating to Indian River County. The fees themselves, as you see by this chart, indicates that if the fees are adopted, there'll be a total of close to 63% of the existing families within Indian River County basically being shut out of the housing market based on the median net annual income. Now, of course, you know, these fees are spread out typically through the life of the loan, whether it's a mortgage or a business loan. But to simplify the analysis, you know, we looked at the median income in the county and the fees being proposed, and in many cases, the fees are actually higher than the median income for several socioeconomic groups within Indian River County. Over a typical 30-year mortgage, the impact fees, in addition to any kind of utility connection fees, would add over $150 to the annual mortgage of a home. More than 7,000 renters and workforce citizens within Indian River County would be unable to afford to live here at that time. The typical retail shop may end up paying an additional $75,000 simply to open a small business. If you go to the next slide, Bob. I think that's the same one. Just hit the next button. Going on to the various categories within the impact fee update, I'd like to focus a little bit on traffic at this point and the road impact fees. Several of the traffic variables that are used in the update represent not only the cost of new capacity, but the cost of replacing existing capacity. And this issue has been really circulating throughout the state for a number of years. And the bottom line really is, should new development be held responsible for replacing existing capacity when you widen a road? Obviously, you cannot use impact fees when you simply resurface a road. Therefore, it's reasonable to expect the prohibition of use of these funds when a road is widened and you not only add new lanes, but you replace the existing lanes without replacing any capacity. This chart reflects some of the lane mile costs within the state of Florida. And there are a couple indications, I believe, earlier by the response of Duncan on our initial report indicating many of the counties such as Citrus, Highlands, Hernando, used a lane mile calculation similar to what is used in the Indian River County calculation, which includes not only new capacity but replacing existing capacity. You know, it's mindful to keep to remember in those counties they did not accept the recommendation of the consultant. In fact, they reduced their transportation impact fees in each case by 50% to reflect the concern they have with that issue among many of the other issues presented to those county commissioners. Okay, Bob. Government Solutions did not simply cut the lane mile cost in half to account for the widening or the replacement of capacity. By reviewing the amount of capacity added to the widening projects, it was determined that a factor of 75 or a reduction of 75 versus 100% would be made to account for the replacement of those roads. And in widening road projects, the additional non-capacity features, whether they be the addition of drainage or additional bike lanes, decorative lighting, things that really do not add any number of vehicle miles to a particular roadway. This, as a result of this one variable, you'll see the difference. And if you take a look at the tables within the update, you'll notice that by segregating the county's widening projects and the new road projects, you can determine the difference between the two cost components. By only looking at new roads in the county, less the outliers, which is, you know, obviously due to some other factor, maybe drainage or safety solutions as well, but only looking at the new roads, the lane mile would be less than $2.1 million per lane mile. The reconstructed roads, based on the same list of roadway inventory provided in the update, would provide you with a lane mile cost of $3.4 million. So you see the discrepancy between a widening and a new road. Obviously, when new development moves in or new businesses come to Indian River County, they expect to have new roads built, not necessarily existing roads resurfaced without adding capacity. By only looking at the new roads, you have a clear, I think, and more concise, more crystallized reflection of the true cost of a new lane mile. The next chart, and this is kind of difficult to see, but this provides the, I think we missed one, but this is going into the schools, which is fine. The other variable with traffic would be the trip characteristics, and we mentioned this in our report as well. We feel that because impact fees are not expended on federal roads, interstate roads, and they have limited exposure to state roads, we feel that the state road trip length should be reduced from the overall trip length reflected in the update. this would amount to about a 25 reduction in the trip length across the board. Obviously, when you do so, you need to also make an adjustment on the, or reflecting within the impact fee credits, which our analysis also considered, by reducing all state and federal revenue credits from the calculations. This reduced the revenue credit from 21 cents per gallon, as reflected in the update, to 8 cents per gallon. The bottom line with these variables is just these two variables that were discussed today relative to the traffic impact fee, is that you have basically a 3%, depending on the land use, a 3% increase or decrease of the traffic impact fee from the existing level. Obviously, it didn't increase as the cost of construction increased, only because during the 2005 update, the same methodology was used in calculating the lane mile cost. Once again, we feel that's not an appropriate method to calculate those costs. And in fact, I believe Duncan and Associates completed a report for Orlando or Orange County, which reflects the same findings. Of course, much of those findings are based on a policy and assumption direction given to them by the county commissioners. The school impact fees, briefly, if we take a look at some of these slides, the construction cost from the 2005 facility cost that was presented by Tyndall and Associates, Tyndall Oliver and Associates, increased by 41%. Our issues with the school impact fee is that Duncan and Associates relied really on a limited sample to calculate their facility costs. In fact, I think only one school was used in addition to an expansion and a gymnasium and an admin expansion as well. So, to come up with a facility cost and a cost per student station based on one school, in my opinion, is limiting the analysis to a sample that's much, much too small. As a result, I took a look at all of the schools on the Treasure Coast that were constructed within the last couple of years, and you'll see that in this table, the average student station cost, and this includes the land, the site improvements, the furniture, fixtures, and equipment, averaged about $22,000. This is compared to the student station cost proposed in the update of $30,000. The credit components were applied as Duncan proposed. We have some issues relative to the state, and if you want to go to the next slide, Bob, relative to the state and the local option, or the local millage revenue credits. This table represents the calculation of the revenue credits from the 2 mil CIT, which is capital improvement tax, and you'll notice that in the calculation that Duncan had prepared, it appeared as if the use of debt service, which was debt issued for new capacity, was included as a non-capacity component. Extracting the debt service from those calculations would leave you much more available funding to be used for new capacity. And this would equate to $22,000 versus $10,000 per student station. The next table briefly reflects the state revenue credit. And the primary issue with the state revenue is not the amount of contributions that the county is receiving from the state. As you can see, they're both the same in the DA, which is the Duncan and Associates, and the General Government Solutions, which is the GS. But the fact that they're calculated based on outdated enrollment projections, dated 2006. If the calculation was based on existing enrollment projections or the most recently available data identifying a downward trend in enrollment, you would have less enrollment going into the state revenue, thereby a higher per-student state revenue credit. And that difference is, as you can see in this chart, a little over $2,000 per student station. As we, you can go to the next one, Bob. As you look at the cost per student station, it's important to understand that all these variables, compound themselves. It's more of a ripple effect. So you may have a reduction in the student station costs coupled with the higher revenue credits from the state and the CIT, and if all components are added together, you would have zero impact fees. Obviously, even though by the numbers, it looks as if that is defensible. If you take a look at some of the other options or scenarios available, by keeping the cost per student station the same and modifying the revenue credits, you would have a net cost of or a gross cost of $1,820 per student. Now, to be mindful that these are costs that need to be multiplied by the student generation rate. Adjusting the existing student station cost and leaving the credits alone would provide you with a net cost of $7.6 thousand per student station. And the next slide will give you a kind of an overview of the total impact fee result as a consequence of applying these variables. With the first set of numbers reflecting the Duncan and Associates recommended impact fee for a single-family dwelling unit of $4,400 compared to the existing fee of $1,700. The scenarios below provide the impact fee based on the variables that are used in the calculation of the alternative impact fees for schools. And the first scenario is the negative impact fee, of course, with all the variables included, while we go to scenario 2 and 3, which adjusts the cost in one case and comes up with a impact fee that is relatively the same as it is now, while the other one drops significantly as well as the revenue credits increase. I think the bottom line to remember when evaluating these, and as Bob said earlier, as you get into the number crunching and the variable use and the assumptions and the methodology, is that there's a lot of information to consider. And it's not an easy job to go through these. And obviously, with impact fees, some may think it's half science and really half art. And sure, there's a lot of arbitrary issues that you can probably provide policy direction on. I think there are other issues that are pretty clear. It's pretty clear that your enrollment is really decreasing, and it's clear that you need to use the most current enrollment data to make these projections of future revenue credits. It's clear that you shouldn't use impact fees to replace existing capacity. You need to segregate the existing from the new capacity and charge new development with their proportionate fair share traffic impact fee as a result of that variable. But we hope you had an opportunity to at least take a look at some of the numbers that we provided. We do appreciate working with the consultants and the staff and everybody involved in developing our analysis, and we look forward to doing so in the future as well. So if there's any questions.
Thank you. Any questions, commissioners? I do have one.
Yes, ma'am.
When you were looking at your student station, did you take into consideration your student station vacant availability? How many vacant student stations are available?
When you come up with a cost per student station, it's based on the total number of student stations in existence. Now, of course, one thing that we provided in our analysis is the fact that there's 14% of your students sitting in portable classrooms. Yet, based on your FISH analysis, there's sufficient permanent student stations for everybody. It's
based on the program.
Well, and he identifies, like I said, the FISH utilized capacity, I think, is being used in his update, which is a reduction of the 100% fish to the utilized version, which is 100% elementary, 90 middle, and 95% for senior or high school students. But, our calculations did not reduce the level of service based on those students sitting in portables. Okay. It's legitimate to think that, hey, I've got 14% of my kids sitting in portables. Is a 14% chance that a new resident or somebody paying an impact fee would have his child sitting in a portable classroom versus a permanent. Based on that reasoning, it's also, in my opinion, reasonable to expect the fee to be reduced based on the level of service adjustment, based on the number of portables you have in the county.
All right.
Okay.
Am I hearing you say that we're using impact fees collected to repave streets?
The calculation of the impact fee for a widening project is based on the total project. If you widen a road from 2 to 4 lanes, and it's not strictly a doubling of the cost, of course, because you may have to purchase right away and there may not be a full resurfacing, but generally, by including the entire project cost into a single lane mile, you are overstating the lane mile cost. And as a result, in my opinion, you're expending impact fee dollars for the resurfacing and the construction of non-capacity projects.
Okay, we get into, I'd like further comment on that when we get into the other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any further questions? Okay, we have the consultant presentation of the impact fee update report. Good afternoon. Can we have your name for the record?
Commissioners, I'm Clancy Mullen with Duncan Associates. See if we can get the mouse up here. We'll reach. And I've got just a brief presentation, kind of an overview of the study that we did. First of all, let me introduce our team. We have Jim Duncan, president of Duncan Associates, serving as principal in charge in this project. Jim's got involved with impact fees in the early 80s, not before, late 70s, okay, and managed the first multi-facility impact fee system in the country in Broward County in the early 80s. I've been working with Jim since 1989, kind of learned impact fees from him, and worked on most of the impact fee studies that we've done, and I'm serving as the project manager on this project. We also have Jim Nicholas, one of the pioneers of impact fees in Florida. Jim's been serving as providing us with peer review of our work products. And finally, Tom Wright, former county attorney with Broward County when they adopted their first impact fees. Isn't that correct, Tom?
I was
Assistant county attorney. Right. Let me just, this just shows our impact fee experience, and this doesn't include Dr. Nicholas's experience, which is, of course, as extensive as ours, if not more so. Just as a little overview of the presentation, I was going to talk about, this is slightly different from the one that I think you may have copies of, hard copies of, where I was going to do a little presentation on the legal framework for impact fees, but Bob's already covered that. So I want to just give a summary of the fee update, response to some of the criticisms that have been raised by the Builders Association, talk about what the updated maximum fees are, comparisons, give you some comparisons with other Florida counties, talk about a revenue neutral option as opposed to, an alternative to not doing anything if that's what you might be considering, and then just some final thoughts. This chart gives the summary of the maximum impact fees. We call them, well, here it's called updated. It shows the current and updated fees for a single family a typical single-family unit, 1,500 to 2,500 square feet. And that updated fee, sometimes we call that the maximum fees. I just want to emphasize that when we did this report, we didn't set out to calculate the highest fees that could possibly be justified. We wanted to calculate fees that were reasonable and appropriate and solidly based. As you can see from the third column there, which shows the increase in fees for a single-family unit, virtually all of that potential $7,000 increase is in traffic, schools, and park impact fees. The others are relatively small. The largest of those is public buildings, which in fact, if you adopted the recommended fees, the revenues would go up 3%, even though they would double for single family. Primarily what that fee adjustment does is shift more of the burden onto non-residential. It was very highly weighted onto non-residential, so it shifts it from non-residential, I'm sorry, to residential. And then the law enforcement fee, the second largest one, actually the Impact Fee Task Force actually recommended that increase. So really we're talking about the three big fees in terms of dollar amounts, which is traffic, schools, and parks. So we'll focus on those. Let's see, how do I go back? Can you go back one page up? Yeah, here we go. In terms of the traffic impact fees, we used the most current cost capacity estimates. We did not base these on costs that were at the in some prior time when things were the economy was booming. The current housing recession had already set in by the time we started this when we got the estimates on which these fees were based. But still, the average cost per lane mile is up about 60%. The capacity was down a little bit, so the average cost per vehicle mile capacity went up about 80%. On the other hand, we calibrated the travel demand factors. That's the trip generation rates, et cetera, that we use on the demand side of the equation. We calibrated that to actual conditions in Indian River County to be sure that they were accurately projecting the amount of traffic that we see on your roadways, and we reduced those by about 24% to account for that. We also retained the 15% reduction, which was a policy decision that the previous commission had made back in 2004 when these fees were last updated, not to go to 100%. And as a result of all of that, the fees are increasing about 50%, 55 to 58%, depending on the land use type. Some of the issues that have been raised, really there's the two issues that Kirk Sorensen talked about pretty extensively, so I think we should talk about those a little bit. One is this whole issue about lane reconstruction as part of widening projects. We did include all costs associated with a widening project. When you widen a road, often you have to, as part of that project, do some reconstruction on the existing lanes. That is generally in Florida considered attributable to growth, and I think that's a reasonable approach. There are a couple of counties that I know of that use a different approach, and Kirk mentioned one of those is Orange County. We did work in Orange County. We updated their fees. We told them this was not the standard practice, but that's the way they did it. They instructed us to do it that way, so we did when we updated their fees. So it is sometimes, some communities basically say you go from a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road, you're building, say it's a mile segment, say it costs $4 million. They divide that $4 million by 4 lane miles, which is what you end up with. 2 of those were already there, so you would say the cost is $1 million a lane mile, as opposed to looking at it the way that most communities in Florida look at it, which is you spent $4 million and you got 2 new lane miles, so it costs you $2 million for each new lane mile. The other issue is the inclusion of the state road improvement costs. And this, there are different counties and different communities that take different approaches to this. State road costs were included in the 2004 update. We continue to include them in this update. And I think there's a lot of good reasons for including state roads. I mean, they're an integral part of your road system. The county is responsible for concurrency on these roadways. We reduce the fees to account for gas tax credits, gas taxes that are generated by new development and are spent on state roads. And the costs that we're coming up with are really in line. The cost per lane mile, even including state road costs and including reconstruction costs, are very much in line with what other counties have come up with in recent years. That list that Kirk showed you, we've added a few. Some of the ones that he used were studies that were older studies. For example, I think the citrus one might have been an older study. In any case, the issue about whether or not you charge 100% of the fee or not is really a separate issue. I think that, we've calculated fees that accurately reflect the cost of road improvements in Indian River County. If the commission decides that new development, for whatever reason, right now, temporarily, or whatever, should pay somewhat less than that, that's a policy issue. But that's, we're trying to calculate what does it actually cost in today's economy to add capacity to your road system to accommodate growth. Even if you're not having a whole lot of growth, there are going to be some cost to growth. Oops. Yeah. And this just shows, let's start over. And this chart just shows where you are relative to other counties. You're, a little above average in terms of your current fees per single-family unit. That's the yellow bar. The green bar is the updated maximum fee, a little over $8,000 a unit. And then that light green in the middle is, that's the possibility is that you could go somewhere in the middle, so that just represents an alternative that I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, what about schools? We updated, of course, the cost per student, the land cost, construction costs, et cetera. And the biggest criticism was the one Kirk raised, which is we've had a limited number of schools built recently in Indian River County. You sort of got this trade-off between using the most recent data and the most recent local data and having a large sample. And you kind of can't have both. The sample that Kirk pulled of other Treasure Coast counties didn't have a large sample for middle schools, for example. I think it had maybe one middle school, or I think it was one. So, that is a difficult consideration. We did base the costs, however, the costs that we used were actually pretty close to the state guidelines for promulgated by the Department of Education. So I think they're, the costs are reasonable. Again, we can argue specifics all day long about, what it could have been. Can we use the most updated data? And of course, anytime you get data, you wait a couple of weeks and it's outdated and you got to start over. So at some point, you got to just say, well, here's the data that we have. It's reasonable. It supports these fees, and deal with the issue of whether you want to charge the maximum, you want to go to 100% or something in between, or stay with the current. The credit per student issue is also raised. Kirk talked about that a little bit, and one of the issues that I don't know if he dwelled on actually, because I'd already responded to it, was the debt service. He raised that in his report, and we addressed that in our recent memo, which has to do with I mean, obviously, debt service on on past improvements is not helping you accommodate growth. New development is going to be helping pay off that debt. So there's, some controversy in the impact fee community about whether or not you need to give credit for that. We certainly believe that you do. New development shouldn't have to pay for new schools to serve their students that they're going to be generating and pay for existing schools that are serving students living in existing developments. That would seem to be double charging. And so we did credit for outstanding debt or for debt service payments. We just didn't credit for 100% of it because a portion of that was due to replacement schools and another portion of that is due to interest costs, which we're not including in the fee calculation. So if you're not including it on the cost side, you shouldn't be including it on the credit side. Then he raised the issue also about the state credit. And here, once again, you get, well, what's the most current data? At the time we prepared the draft that's before you today, this was July of last year, that was the most current. That was based on the adopted 5-year plan, the school district's adopted 5-year capital plan. Now, that's changed. Enrollment projections are down, but it's likely also the projections of future state funding are down. So, that chart Kurt showed you took the projections of state revenues out of the last capital plan and the growth projections out of the current capital plan. So, again, at some point, you just have to say, here's the most recent data. I mean, we could go back and update it, but come October, there's going to be a new capital plan, and if we delay this thing for 6 months, then we'll be arguing about we don't have the most current data once again. So, student generation rates actually went down some. We calibrated those student generation rates, something that hadn't been done in the previous study. Put all that together, the fees increased by 150%, at least the maximum fees, from about $1,800 to about $4,500 a unit. Okay, I think we've already talked about most of these critiques. There's the issue of student generation rates are falling. Again, that's really a temporary phenomenon, very likely. You've got a lot of unsold inventory out there, homes that aren't occupied. They're not generating students today, but you still have to collect impact fees from those units because they will be occupied and you're not going to have another chance to get impact fees. So really the student generation rates that are most appropriate are long-term student generation rates. So even though enrollment might not be increasing as quickly as you would think it should be based on what development is occurring, it's going to be a temporary phenomenon. I talked about the cost, the small sample size. The land cost, there was a similar criticism there that's based on only one acquisition. We did an analysis that showed, if we used the same land cost, instead of the $95,000 that they paid per acre for the last school site, which is the most recent and localized data that state law says we should use, if we used the park cost, which was about $55,000, the fees would be about 7% lower. So, unless we're talking about going to 100% here, this is not a big issue. Portable buildings, Kurt brought that up again. And it is a fact that the way the Department of Education counts capacity, there's enough capacity district-wide to accommodate every student you currently have enrolled. But you still have portable buildings. Does that mean that we should reduce the fee to account for the fact that not every new house is going to, if it generates a student, they may actually end up in a portable building? To me, that's not a reason to reduce the fee. I mean, existing development has got the same situation. We're not charging a fee that guarantees that every student is going to be in a permanent building. We're just charging or calculating a fee that we can build, according to DOE standards, enough capacity to accommodate that student. The fact that some students are going to be in portable buildings, I mean, the capacity is not always exactly where you need it. There's temporary issues. Sometimes one of those students is going to be in a portable building, but that's just the way it is. And I talked about the property tax credits, so I think we've covered that. Where are you in comparison to other counties? Very much on the low end, with what's your fee, about $1,800. The maximum fee that we calculated is over $4,000. You know, you could pick anything in between there if you wanted to, or you could keep the fees the same, obviously. And finally, park impact fees. The total cost per person increased about 35%, and a lot of this was due to the fact that we included state-owned land, which I think is reasonable to include, but you don't have to. I mean, these state-owned lands are being used for county parks. The parks are providing service. The county has long-term leases on this land. But on the other hand, you don't have to charge for it. And we actually figured out without the state land, the fees would go up about 22%, from $1,463 to $1,795 for a typical single-family unit. So that's certainly an alternative. The credit per person actually decreased. You have less, you're getting less grant money than you were before, or there's less outstanding debt. So the maximum fees increased about 70%, but as I said, a good portion of that was due to inclusion of state-owned land. We had some criticism raised about the park fee, that the fee should be based on planned improvements as opposed to the consumption-based approach. And Bob talked about this a little bit. The consumption-based approach does not make any assumptions about how much growth is occurring. It basically calculates, you know, if you add a new house, if you add another 100-unit subdivision, how many more parks are you going to have to add? And so if you have less growth, you'll need less parks. We don't use the plan-based approach for any of the other fees, so and this, you know, it's definitely a defensible approach. Kurt didn't bring that up, but I think somebody brought it up that was on the Impact Fee Task Force. In Kurt's analysis, one of the things he talked about, I don't think he mentioned it up here today, but he did in his study, was that the fee should be based on the permanent plus weighted peak population, which is what the comprehensive plan talks about in terms of the level of service. But it just needs to be kept in mind that, you know, what's in the comprehensive plan was basically adopted to match the previous impact fee study, which used that approach. And we certainly had proposed amending the comprehensive plan to be consistent with this approach. And the second point is that if you switch to that approach, it doesn't mean a lower fee. It's, you know, it would be a higher number. You'd be dividing your existing amount of parks, the existing value of those parks, by a bigger number. But then on the other hand, when you calculate, well, how many people are going to be in a single-family unit or in a condo unit, during the peak season, it's going to be more people. You're going to have lower vacancy rates. You're going to have more people per unit. So it should really be a wash in terms of the amount of the fee. And where are you on your park fees? You're kind of in the middle there with about, the yellow bar is the current fee, about $1,400 per single-family unit. The dark green shows the maximum fee that we'd calculated, which is about $2,400 a unit. This alternative, I'll talk about that a little more. That just shows you kind of what the average fee is in Florida today. Okay, what about revenue neutral fees? I wanted to talk about that because, you know, there may be a tendency because of economic times, and I think that's the recommendation of the task force, is let's don't do anything. Let's just, you know, put this off. And I just want to stress that it would be preferable, I think, from a legal defensibility standard, if nothing else, that you revise the fees, and at least, even if it's going to be revenue neutral, you adopt fees that are based on the most current study, as opposed to relying on 2004 and 2005 studies as the basis of your fees. This first column gives you the percents of the maximum fees for each land use that you would calculate your revenue neutral fees on. If you charge those percentages, you would essentially get the same amount of revenue as you would under your current fee schedule. Now, obviously, this has to assume some kind of mix of development, and there's it's obviously not exactly a science, but this is essentially what you'd have to do. Solid waste is the one exception, because I think to be revenue neutral, you'd have to be like 140% of the maximum fees. I'm sorry, you'd have to be 140% of what your current revenues are in order to be revenue neutral, at least for single family. The county priorities, that column is just there as to illustrate that you don't have to be revenue neutral for every facility in order to be revenue neutral overall. In order to have, pretty much the same fees per single family unit, you could adjust up and down. You could, for example, get rid of the solid waste fee, get rid of the library fee, actually reduce your park fee, and increase your road fee. If roads is a priority, that's one alternative that would get you more road revenue without basically increasing overall burden on development, for example. And this just shows what what kind of fees for a single family unit, how these fees would look. Your current fee, your total, you add it all up, it's $9,800. The revenue neutral fee would actually be slightly higher for single family, because you're losing revenue on the, you're shifting some of the burden to single family from non-residential in those public buildings and solid waste fees. And then the county priorities, quote unquote, alternative, under that scenario would actually be slightly less, go down to about $9,600. And this just shows, sort of total fees compared to other counties. Again, you're kind of in the broad middle there with, about just under $10,000 in total impact fees. You could go up closer to the top. You could do your alternative, which would drop them down just very slightly. That's the revenue neutral. That green bar is the revenue neutral, quote unquote, county priorities fee, which is pretty much the same fee. Oops. So, just some final thoughts. One is that impact fees didn't cause this slowdown, and freezing your fees, reducing your fees, eliminating fees is not going to bring it back. I just did a presentation last week in Destin, Florida. They've got their fees for a single family unit are $760, and they're not getting any growth there either. So, if impact fees drove development, there'd be booming in Destin, but it's not what's causing it. You've got an existing inventory of unsold homes that have already paid impact fees. Reducing impact fees, freezing impact fees isn't going to have any effect on clearing out that inventory. You might want to consider, as I said, prioritizing fees. If you're going to do no increase, you want to keep it revenue neutral, you could look at which ones you want to do. But bottom line is that I strongly urge you to consider updating the fees based on the new study, as opposed to simply leaving them alone, because they'll be more defensible. They'll be based on the most recent and localized data. The fees are going to be proportional to land use based on a fee on a recent study that's defensible. And that really concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Any questions, commissioners? Yes.
Yeah, I did. Part of this discussion, it seems like, is the argument over what the correct costs are. We started this 17 months ago, and the market was in a boom cycle, and now 17 months later it's in a down cycle. And when the criticism is, we're not using current prices, and if we kick it back to you guys, and you take 6 months and come to us, and we kick it to the task force another 6 months, and by the time we see it again, it'll be another 17 months, and now the market's booming again, and the same criticism, hey, we're using old prices. So I guess in some of this, my question is, can we, instead of debating over the cost figures, can we debate the methodology and come up with a model that, say, every 6 months we can plug in a current price and reflect a change, but we all agree upon a methodology. And just as an example, looking at the road costs, I'm kind of in between your opinion and Mr. Sorensen's. But if we said, okay, let's say any right-of-way costs associated with a capacity improvement, 100% of the right-of-way is attributed to impact fees. Stormwater, 100%. Engineering and design, 100%. Materials, your road-based asphalt is 50%. And then, landscape medians, et cetera, is 50%. And that's just an example. Let's say we can break it down by that category, and we agree on that methodology. Then every 6 months, I would think it'd be pretty easy to go back and say, okay, in the previous 6 months, what did we spend on right-of-way acquisition per acre? And then we just punch that dollar amount into our impact fee formula. Same with stormwater costs and engineering design costs. And that way we're always plugging in an updated cost into a methodology that we agreed is fair and appropriate. Is that, I guess my question is that A, legal, and B, is that doable?
Well, there are communities that do something sort of similar, which is they have an automatic inflation adjustment based on some criteria, whether it be, FDOT's, average construction cost index or whatever might be appropriate, some kind of land cost index. You've got so many things that go into it, though, that, there are other issues involved. It's not, it's very difficult to address all of the issues, all of the factors that go into an impact fee calculation in that manner. So you could address, the cost side would be the easiest. But even then, I've never seen anybody do it that precisely. Usually it's based on, a more generic index, some kind of construction cost.
It just seems we're trying to thread a needle standing on a boat in a hurricane, and it's a moving target. We're never going to hit it right to anybody's satisfaction. Either the number is going to be too old or too low or too high or something. And my concern is, too, is yeah, the real estate bust may be, or the real estate may be in a down market now, but we're still paying pretty hefty prices for right-of-way. Land has not gone down. Single-family home prices crashing, but we're still paying pretty premium prices on right-of-way. And I think part of that is the appraisers keep telling us, raw land holds its value, and two, I think the sellers know we're kind of in a bind. We need the right-of-way to build the road. So I don't see that price coming down. So I just want to make sure whatever we come up with, it's going to reflect the current cost to do this. And if it's, getting the methodology figured out better and plugging in current prices or whatever, but I just think we need to make sure we're keeping track of the current cost or the future cost. We're trying to set this on a 3-year cycle now. We don't know what those prices are going to be doing. So, again, I think it's better to determine methodology and then update the prices based on some index or, our actual cost for the previous 6 months. And if prices do go down, then that'll be reflected when we update.
Commissioner Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Earlier, you mentioned Destin as an indicator where perhaps impact fees did not effect any development or growth, but certainly it does affect it in some capacity. And we're looking at Destin in comparison to our county. I believe that their economy is, we've all been there, that it's based largely on tourist attraction, and they have a very robust tourist economy, which we do not have in comparison. I believe they would probably compare better with St. Augustine. Would you agree with that?
Sure, yeah, I wasn't saying it's a fair comparison. I'll just use them as an example because their fees, they have virtually non-existent fees, which is kind of rare in Florida,
but they have a whole lot of other element for their own indicative economy that we just do not possess.
Yeah, it's a different economy, no question.
I just want to clarify that because the numbers are rather obscure. And in addition, you said that Orange County had suggested a mode or some factors for your methodology to achieve the ultimate report. And I wanted to know what direction you got from Indian River County for that mode or methodology that geared your findings to where they are now.
Yeah, in Orange County, that's the way they had done it. You know, we came in after several previous consultants had developed this methodology. They indicated they just wanted to retain the same basic formula, so we updated it for them, and we pointed out that they could make changes to that, but they chose not to. So it was really more of an inertia thing as anything else, or a precedent. I mean, that's the way things have been done historically.
But what base did you get from Indian River County that set the pace for your investigation or fact finding?
Well, kind of a similar. I mean, you know, Tyndale Oliver had done this update in 2004 for roads, and it's a pretty standard methodology. So we used theirs. I mean, we used the same methodology. We didn't propose to change that particular approach.
So it's basically
the
status
same
quo.
Consumption-based road impact fee formula.
Thank you. No further, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Davis?
Just real quick, is there a way of incorporating whenever a charter school opens up? I mean, we have Imagine schools coming in here. They're talking about opening 2 charter schools. We have, is there a way of working those into the system to get some accurate numbers as far as services being provided that aren't costing us perhaps as much money as a study would say?
Well, we do an adjustment for charter school enrollment. So we basically exclude, so that's taken into account in the student generation rates. We reduce those to account for students that are actually going to be coming to regular public schools as opposed to charter schools. Because you don't have to provide, you don't have to provide the school facilities, the buildings for a charter school student.
Right. And so tell me how that, you reduce what rates for kids that go where now?
The student generation rates have been reduced to account for charter enrollment.
Okay. All right. So then where do you work in your figures then whenever you have acreage that's given to the school district? Where does that work into the denominator, I guess, whenever you start dividing out what it costs per acre for property?
We did not factor in. I mean, usually when developers dedicate, now I understand maybe there have been some examples in Indian River County in which developers didn't get credit for land that they dedicated. Typically, donations are not credited out of impact fees. It's more done on a case-by-case basis. The particular developer who does dedicate land gets a reduced fee for his development.
I apologize. You have a cold?
All right, thanks.
Mr. Wheeler?
Yeah, I've got several questions. One, I noticed that Broward County was way low. Is that because they're at build-out down there, not building new roads, or or aren't they charging what they need to charge for impact fees, and they funding their infrastructure in other ways?
Wow.
Okay.
Mr. Tom Wright, Broward County, with its
Pull the mic down.
with its road impact fees, has for the most part moved to a fee that helps subsidize the transit system. In other words, the physical improvements needed for transit for the buses. And therefore, it has greatly limited the amount of fees that are still collected for roads in certain areas that really aren't served very well by transit, and where, road impact fees are still collected and spent on roads. So it used to be it was a fairly healthy road impact fee in Broward County. They shifted their priorities, so it would not be appropriate to list it under roads because it's really now transit for the most part.
Okay. And that, you give a 15% discount on what our fees are currently, correct?
Right,
In other
yeah.
words, here's what it would cost, 100%, we give 15%, so you discount that for any errors or to slop in it, to lower that by 15%.
Yeah, that's not something we typically do, but that is what was done, in the last update, so we just carry that forward.
Okay. And the other question is, why did you determine that, or to put the state lands in for parks and recreation? What was the reason?
Well, because that is, it's based on your existing level of service, and that is the level of service you're providing. Some of your parks are on state land. The state actually owns the land. You lease the land, but it's still, you're providing that level of park facilities and service to your current residents. So I think it's legitimate to include that in your existing level of service. But again, if you didn't, the fee would be significantly lower.
And Clancy, I can add to that. So some of the we've developed some of the state park lands. For example, North County Park. The North County Aquatic Center is there. We've put $5.5 million into the North County Aquatic Center, $2 million into the North County ball fields. So we're developing that property, so it's not just the state land that's there, but there are also facilities and substantial county investment that's been made in many cases on the state land.
Okay. Next, if I read that correctly when you were going through your PowerPoint, that the cost of a lane mile is up about 63% from 2004.
Yeah, I think that's
okay. And one of the things that I've noticed that, an observation here, I was on the commission back in the 80s when most of the development that was going on was much smaller, and local developers, and in many cases, they would even work with the county and donate property and lands or sell it at a reduced rate. And one of the things that's happened with the boom in Florida is a lot of the developers have come in and they buy the land. It could be zoned ag but designated residential. And then they come in and rezone it, which increases the value of the property considerably. And then they sell that right away that we need at the higher price. We've had examples of that in the past, which also increases the impact fee. And my point is that the developers, to some degree, are creating this situation themselves on an individual basis when they do this, because property values have gone so high because of the way they do it now. Instead of selling it at the price they bought it for, they sell it at the price it's worth when it's rezoned. And I kind of like the idea of not raising impact fees. But my question would be, if you've got to build these roads and you don't raise the impact fees that pay for these roads, and other facilities, of course, then who do you send the bill to? Or do you just quit adding on and quit building? And it's kind of a catch-22. You've got to have. If it's going to cost so much to do the infrastructure, then somebody's got to pay for it. And if you don't pay for it with impact fees that are accurate, then where would the extra money come from? I don't know, maybe Jason could answer that.
That's a good point. And that's a concern that we have is what this impact fee study does is it kind of outlines what is the cost of providing the level of service that we have today. The commission can always make a policy decision to reduce that fee if they so desired. However, if this is the cost to provide the roads and we reduce this, where do we come up with the other money? You could say gas taxes or sales taxes. Well, we already use gas taxes and sales taxes towards the roads. Those are built into the credit that's provided. So we're really left without another funding source. And and that's one of our main concerns is we have a lot of roads that need to be done. They're a necessity to get done, and if we give a huge discount, the concern is, will we have available funds to widen all the roads that we need to as time moves along?
Another concern of mine is the future, the next year or two or three. We're into some pretty healthy inflation again, and particularly with anything that's done with oil, and like blacktop, building supplies, transportation to get it there. And I don't see anything coming down. I only see prices going up, and that's a concern I have. And I agree with, I think you said it or Commissioner O'Brien said it, but I don't think that the impact fees have anything to do with the slowdown at all. And I don't think that reducing impact fees or leaving them the same would it increase the building. And if it did increase the building, particularly in single-family homes, we're only going to increase our inventory that they're trying to get rid of now. So those are some of my concerns. I don't know if anybody's got solutions or answers to those, but
thank you very much for your update. We have to take a captioning 10 minutes, and we'll recess for 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up to the public. Thank you. If we can please take our seats and resume. This is a point in time where we listen to public discussion, and we would like to hear from everyone who would like to speak. And we have two podiums, one on each side. We'd like for you to give your name and address for the record, please. And just, we can begin as we begin. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Bowden. My name is George Butel. I live at 5000 16th Street. I've been living here since 1950. This, to me, is voodoo economics. And an analogy the only analogy that I could come up with the way I feel today is that I've been wrongly convicted, and now I'm in front of a hanging judge, but I know I have something hard coming. I just don't know how long it's going to be. And what we need is a detailed study of why the government needs, we have a detailed study of why the government needs more taxes. What we really need is an efficiency study of how the government can save taxes. We've been taxed to death here. We're taxing ourselves out of existence. We want clean industry to come here. But how can we bring clean industry if we can't give them affordable housing for the people to work? They'll run right away from it. It's like going out and hunting for food and shooting yourself in the foot before you get out to the field. I just think the performance, the spending performance of Indian River County as a whole has been very poor. We haven't saved money anywhere. We've just spent a lot of money buying development rights where those lands would probably not be developed in our lifetime. And if they were if they were to be developed, they would be developed at a very, very low rate per acre. And a good example of not being mindful of our economy is that you built this beautiful structure, but you'd hired an out-of-town contractor instead of leaving it to a contractor in the town to build this. And
we did, for the record, we did have an in-town contractor too.
You did?
Donadia.
That was just the architect. It was not the builder. I don't see where the poor people of this county, and I think it's been alluded to, that of how they can afford any more money for a house. Not only them, if you build apartment houses, how are they going to afford the new taxes for the rents? Indian River Community College wants to be a 4-year college. You build apartments for the students, how are they going to afford that? And I don't see anywhere, and I've never heard of any economic analysis or benefit analysis for any of the families moving in. Families move in, most of which have jobs. Some of them create small businesses. They employ people. There's got to be an economic benefit for somebody that moves into these new houses. Well, that's been negated or canceled, and nobody's even put that into the analysis. And as I said before, you know, these people come into town, they might open a small business, they might employ 2 or 3 businesses. There's a lot of benefit to that. So I don't think everything has been taken into account. And I'm against the whole increase of the fees altogether. And I would hope that you would weigh both sides. But I think Mr. O'Brien's already made up his mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Chuck Meckling, 1999 Point West Drive. One of the things that bothers me is that the current report discusses so much about the Tinsdale Oliver report. We were all around in 2005 when that report was voted on, and we all talked about that the ink on the paper wasn't worth it. It was a lot of discrepancies, and now we have a report that talks about taking us in traffic impact fees to the third highest in the state, up there with Collier County. I'd like to bring in some bankers from Collier County so we could discuss how that county is doing. I think it would scare us. One of the things I heard and was discussed in our impact fee force was the fact that you take the state cost of building a state road, you're rolling it into this proposed traffic impact fee. We all know that that cost is substantially different than building a county road. Right now, we're in this situation of State Road 60. The money comes back from the state. The lost interest carry is being paid by the developers through an additional fee. And then if this was to pass, I'll get the opportunity to pay the fee for state roads again because we have upsized the cost of this impact fee in the proposed rate. I am in agreement that growth needs to pay for itself, but at what cost? What I would hope to think is that we would take the time to look this over, have a chance to really review these numbers, because I'm not saying that we don't need something, but what we don't need to do is put the last nail in the coffin of an industry that is still trying to employ people and to move our county forward. The issue that I feel we've not discussed today is the aspect in part of commercial and industrial. I took some time the other day to think about this, and I want to read this. The issue that our county faces is complex, and there is no easy or fast food answers to our current economic situation. If impact fees were raised at this time, the end result could very well be an increase in millage rate. This would mean higher taxes to all that live in Indian River County. Or as an alternative, the level of service provided by government would need to be adjusted. We need to keep in mind that every time a new commercial building comes online and becomes an active part of our community, it not only provides products and services for the taxpayers of this county, but it also creates a stream of revenue that goes to the county. When a county has a steady stream of revenue, it can guarantee a level of service to its taxpayers. The end result of a viable business is that employees of that business spend their earnings to a great extent within their community. These employees also purchase gasoline. For every dollar of gasoline purchase, revenue is generated by the gas tax that allows a direct flow of funds to assist in road construction within our county. Every business owner of an ongoing basis pays the following: property taxes, tangible personal taxes, sales taxes. We may look at such counties as Brevard with its diversified base of high technology and aeronautic corporation, which allows a solid tax base for the government to provide services to its taxpayers. Do we not believe that we should strive for the same? Given the current economic environment, we need to focus on helping our community in the short term with a long-term vision of a strong program in place for our future. That's what I believe in part what we need to be talking about, and I believe that adding more fees on top of our current fees at this point in time will not assist in that process. What would assist is a more viable base in our community which allows direct flow of money into the county's coffers, which allows for services to be provided and actually has the value there to add to paying for roads through gas tax revenue and other means. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Don Simon. I've got up and talked a few times before on a couple of recent matters. One thing I want to disclose this afternoon, I am a certified financial planner. I'm a chartered financial consultant. I'm currently the chairman of the board of the Indian River National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors, which consists of about 60 local financial planners and insurance agents. I am not coming forward as a spokesman for them today. It's just my own personal position. Over the 30 years that I've been in this business, I had 10 local municipal governments as clients in the state of Maryland. One of the governments was the city of Gaithersburg, and they were a client for 25 years. Roger Anderson, who was the financial director, every year he kept wanting more financial awards every year from the Maryland Municipal League as well as the state of Maryland. And finally, he had so many plaques on his wall, I asked him, how did you win so many awards in financial management? He said, I have to tell you this, I'm not that bright. All I did is I estimated our revenues a little bit low and the expenses just a little bit high, and that kept things running well for many years. What I'm seeing here is I have a real concern because I'm seeing no inflation adjustment in the figures in the impact fees. I'm also seeing a 15% discount factor, which I don't understand the rationale where that was pulled from. The other thing is that the impact fee was amortized and has to be spent over six years. I think you could make a conservative argument that that may be low, that it may be should be amortized over 10 or 15 years instead of spent over 6 years. So I see these fees as all being very low. I do agree that no matter what, we're going to have future growth in this county, but I feel that with the taxpayers just voted themselves a $5 million tax decrease coming out of the budget, and I'm concerned that if you don't increase impact fees, we're going to have more negative economics. The final thing that I'm concerned about is in the task force report, in a letter signed by Mr. Torres, it says that many level of service standards oversimplify ratios by relying on a single capital element such as acres of lands for parks or square feet for library buildings. The report from Duncan Associates showed that there was no factor in there for libraries at all. As far as the parks, I've lived in Illinois, Maryland, New Jersey, and Georgia, and all the areas I lived in had more parks, and they also had more sidewalks and bike paths. So I personally bike and I walk, and I think with the cost of fuel going up, I think we could probably all use to do a little bit more of that ourselves. So, and I don't see that in the cost projections of the roadways of sidewalks or bike paths being added into that. So that would be a final indicator that these figures may be low. That's pretty much what I have to say. Also, the Duncan report also indicates that existing school fees are very low. Park and law enforcement merit consideration, and they're recommending updating the fee schedule. So I would ask you to give strong consideration to being realistic when you're looking at these numbers. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Harry Zambelli. I live at 1794 Tamarind Place in Vero. I don't envy the board's chore in coming ultimately to this. I also don't envy the consultants that had to come up with that conglomeration of numbers. But I do have some questions about the numbers, and I actually have a suggestion. With regard to the road situation, the transportation cost, are interior roads within the development including a cost factor? Okay, thank you. With regard to the land values used in cost determinations, was the highest and best use criteria used? Pardon me?
It's a mix because what happens is whatever we were able to obtain our past property.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bear, would you repeat again, please?
It could be a mix of many ways of valuing the property.
I'm all right.
What it actually is what we've paid for property or right away in the past, utilizing that. So it's what we have utilized. What we're utilizing is our actual cost of purchasing right away.
Okay, hard cost.
Our historical cost.
Pardon?
Our historical cost, our actual historical cost.
The reason I bring that up, one of the problems with our ad valorem taxes here is that they're generally, maybe always based on the highest and best use of properties and lands, and I've noticed some of the purchases that have been made by various public entities where they pay based on that, and they may be buying a piece of agricultural land, but the tax appraiser thinks its highest and best use is condominium development, and consequently the price go with it. I hope that's not the case here, but based on your answer, it's not. One of the things that's not being mentioned in terms of the impact is a little bit scary to me. There is an effort to bring more industry into Indian River County, preferably of a high-tech research, whatever type. The statistics quoted in this table that's given out are based on various size buildings. And it looks very insignificant when you talk about, under the industrial category, a manufacturing or warehouse type building in terms of, or a mini warehouse or thereabouts, in terms of 1,000 square feet as the example, and then show we're talking maybe 3,000, 3,500. It doesn't look very impressive, doesn't look threatening, but change that warehouse to a $40,000 or $60,000, 40 or 60,000 square foot building, as you might see if we got a serious applicant in that direction, and then multiply it by the 3,300. And it's my understanding in that case that it would be 3,300 times, in that illustration, 60, and therefore a very significant figure. What I'm saying is there's a built-in problem here in terms of evaluating locations for manufacturing, for research, and for various types of uses that our Chamber of Commerce right now is trying to establish. My last point is, among homes, residential, there's a break point in the cost based on, from what unless I'm misreading this, square footage of homes. For instance, at 1,500, 2,400, 2,500, we're talking about a new figure of 16,000 and change. Well, we all know there are all kinds of, say, 2,000 square feet. Some of them perhaps cost $200,000. Some of them perhaps cost $2 or $3 million. So again, we may be building inequity in the purchase of homes by using this flat fee kind of thing based on a break point. Does that mean that everything I've said means that it's a bad idea? No, I don't think it's a bad idea that we have this type of plan. What I do think is it's going to need an awful lot of work to pull the inequities and the questions out, and I wish you the best of luck. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Maria Fulcini. I'm a 25-year resident of Vero Beach, and I reside at 1206 5th Place, Vero Beach. I am the president of the Realtors Association of Indian River County, and I am speaking today on behalf of over 1,000 realtors to convey our position on the proposed impact fees. No one needs to be reminded of the sluggish state of the economy. The concern is so great that the federal government has taken several steps recently in attempts to kickstart the real estate industry. Their hope and intent is that stimulating the real estate industry will also stimulate the economy and drive it as it has the last several years. The proposal to increase impact fees thwarts that intent. It is a disincentive for area builders. It aggravates the existing concern and need for affordable housing, and it lengthens the market's recovery time by adding additional fees to the consumer. Impact fee studies have found the following. The higher cost for new construction in turn results in upward pressure on the cost of existing properties. It increases urban sprawl as developers seek political jurisdictions without impact fees. It creates disproportionate disadvantages to lower-income households. Several counties have recently either enacted a freeze on impact fees, rolled back the rates, or have agreed to waive them temporarily. It seems the prudent action to take during this housing market slump. Homeownership is the cornerstone of the American dream, and increasing impact fees diminishes that dream. The Realtors Association cannot and does not support the proposed increases of impact fees, as it will only hinder the recovery of the real estate market and the overall economy of this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Chris Bieber. My address is 645 38th Court in Vero Beach. And I had the pleasure of working with the particular task force that was facilitated by the Chamber. I had put together the portion which is kind of quantifying the impacts, and I guess I'm not here to dispute necessarily, as a member of the task force, the methodology that's used. I'm trying to put it into dollars and cents. Inside the impact fee report and recommendation, I've kind of broken down what it means from a commercial standpoint. I think that it's very easy to say that you don't want to pay impact fees, but there need to be alternative solutions to the problem, which I think the task force was in 100% agreement in doing. This means real business incentives real incentives for businesses to come here. We spent a lot of time trying to keep the current businesses that we have, which provide a huge economic impact on this county, but I don't know how realistic we are at attracting new businesses and looking for new ventures that are going to increase and add to our tax base. There's been considerable discussion in the past meeting of Amendment 1, which the general revenues are going to be decreased. Any impact fee that's collected has to be spent within 6 years on capital improvement and can't be used in the operating cost. If you continue to collect higher impact fees, and the impact fees are what they are. I'm talking about additional impact fees. Not only do you have to spend that money on additional parks and roads and capital expenditures, but you also have to pay for those out of the operating budget, which has been decreased with the tax cuts that they have. In regard to the Duncan report, I feel that there's reason to look at the methodology. I think there are several areas where it seems that the costs are out of line. School generation rates, by no means an expert in the determining of the increase of impact fees, but just as a layperson going through some of the costs, one of the costs that was included in the parks was a $5.5 million aquatic center, which was clearly stated that, well, we're not going to build another one. But then again, we're collecting an impact fee for the use of that as if we were going to replace that. That's some of the things that the replacement cost method does, is it replaces things that we may not build another one of. Strictly as a taxpayer, and I am a taxpayer in the county, I feel that there needs to be an ongoing look at running the county more like a business. Currently, Indian River County is planning to spend $1.6 roughly million for land acquisition for future parks. That's part of the Duncan report. This expense is to maintain a level of service for the future. I think the only question right now to the board is to either increase the impact fees or reduce the level of service by default. I think we need to take a look at the level of service that we're providing and weigh in the fact is this really the best use of our funds right now in this economic environment. One final concern that I had was the newspaper impact. Some of the graphs that were in the Duncan Associates report show Indian River County expanding up to the near highest level for all areas of impact fees, and I can tell you that the first thing that's going to be on every newspaper in Florida is Indian River County has the highest impact fees out there. And that's, while it may not have to do with hindering the current housing market, I can promise you it doesn't help in the commercial or the housing market. I believe this county can no longer rely strictly on citrus and service businesses. There needs to be an ongoing look at generating new business that can add to the tax base, add to the workforce, and will push dollars through the economy. An aggressive stance on bringing businesses with meaningful incentives for businesses to come here not only means what we have here, but looking elsewhere to diversify and expand. Tax dollars provided by businesses for property tax, sales tax, and job creation is the fuel that we need to sustain the economy. Deterring these businesses with additional fees and extremely difficult permitting processes only will lead to the nicest county that none of us can afford to live in. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Honey Manous. I'm president of the Indian River Neighborhood Association. I live in the city of Vero Beach, and I participated in this task force, and I thank the chambers for their invitation to do so. I was the lone representative of the community not represented by the development industry, and I formally dissented from their opinion. My paperwork can be found buried in theirs. Very clearly, my position is that the development industry must pay for the cost of impact on our community. This translates very simply. The more houses the developer builds, the more roads the community needs. And if the developer doesn't pay for those roads, then the taxpayer has to pay for them. This is called subsidizing, and to do that, you'll have to raise taxes. There's no other way around it. Our people, our taxpayers, just simply can't afford that at this point in time. There's too many of them here who are struggling to make ends meet. A lot of them because we do have this downturn in the housing market. They just can't handle more taxes. Please don't put any more burden on them. I feel what few homes we have that are selling, the developer should be paying the fees for the future needs. You know, a lot of money was paid for this consultant. You chose a very reputable firm whose work is well known and accepted all over Florida. And I believe it's time for you to accept the consultant's report and move on. To do otherwise is going to stay in the past, and no one is going to benefit by this. We have to focus on meeting challenges, as was just mentioned. We have to come up with solutions that are good for everybody. And we have to seek balance in our community, and I hope you'll do this for us now. Thank you.
Next. Next.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Nancy Offit. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the Treasure Coast Builders Association. And at our task force, I took exception to Mrs. Manous's comment that she represented the only organization speaking for the taxpayers. Our association represents 1,200 corporate members that employ approximately 10,000 people. They and their families, as well as myself and my family, are absolutely taxpayers of Indian River County, and we're proud of the contribution that we make. I think everybody in this room, whether they're working or not, is a taxpayer, and I hope they'll be respected for that. That aside, I would like to say how much I wish that Jerry Swanson was here to lend his voice to this debate. He was very much admired, and he was sorely missed. If we did not appreciate it before, most of us are now only acutely aware of the vital role that construction industry played in the economy of our community and of the state. Traditionally, Florida's home building industry has annually pumped more than $65.8 billion, that's with a B, into the state's economy and employed more than 500,000 Floridians. Home building has been Florida's second largest economic engine, second only to tourism. Now, I realize that, and they'll probably take off my stripes and buttons, but we are not, at least I am not here today to ask you for lowering impact fees for housing. I realize that we have an inventory that must be absorbed before we can go forward. However, in the meantime, we have a commercial and an industrial community that needs to be revived, not killed. The people who would be building houses can also work on those projects, whether they be public, private, corporate, or industrial. Florida now faces $2 billion deficit, primarily because of the housing downturn. It is not producing, it is not generating dock stamps or sales taxes, and obviously people who are out of work are not able to consume other goods and services. Florida has seen its impact fees increase by 149% in the last 4 years. Our impact fees are now the second highest in the country, second only to California. I believe it was Mr. Simmons who pointed out that this impact fee does not give take into account time or component for inflation, well, we're talking about an increase here of 72%. If that's not inflation, I don't know what is. And also, his suggestion that they amortize the funds longer than 7 years, I wish they could, but unfortunately, I believe that state law dictates the 7-year period. You have heard Dr. Sorensen's presentation that questions the basis of the proposed increase in impact fees based on the former study by Tyndall Oliver. We ask you not to heap more in, to base that study on to use that study for this study and don't use this study for the next study. We have to come to some realization of what is accurate information. Builders have historically opposed impact fees, feeling that they are regressive and disproportionately affect those who can afford them the least. We also think they are counterproductive because as costs increase, the number of buildings who can pay these fees decreases. They also are charged against existing property owners as well as new people. That said, where impact fees are imposed, we expect that they be more than merely legally defensible. We would like them to be fair and reasonable. In this spirit, we ask the county to consider several points. Infrastructure, including roads, public buildings, libraries, schools, fire stations, and administrative offices, should be designed and built for functionality to meet basic services without increasing their costs with expensive amenities. Be conservative when adding to the list of services and facilities promised by government. Remember that once these levels of service are accepted, they must be accomplished, they must be provided. Impact fees may help with the down payment on these public projects, but all taxpayers find themselves eventually paying for the maintenance, operation, and upkeep of these facilities once they're in place. In talking to someone earlier, I said it's like impact fees pay the initiation fees, but the rest of us have to pay the annual club dues. So it's not something that just someone who hasn't arrived here yet pays and then the rest of it goes away. While impact fees can help to acquire and improve conservation lands and such, the ongoing expenses becomes a general liability. I said that before. So in understanding, Mr. Wheeler brought up the fact that what else can we do? Well, I suggest that we can look at the levels of service that we've adopted and decide which ones of these are realistic, which ones can we afford, and which ones are just too expensive for Indian River County. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
My name is Dwayne Wise. I live at 8485 Seacrest Drive on Vero Beach. I had an opportunity a few years ago to speak on this subject to a few of you there, and at that time I opposed impact fees and gave several concerns that I've come to roost and I've come home. And I want to bring them back to your attention, if I may. The impact fees have been sold to the public on the basis someone else is going to pay for our improvements, our infrastructure in the future. Well, that is not true, and that has not happened. One of our speakers today indicated that the impact fee in the last few years has had no effect on the existing homeowners and no effect on taxes. And again, I have to disagree with him. As a licensed real estate broker, and Bob Keating has alluded to this in the past, the principle of substitution, which indicates if someone raises the price of one subdivision, future sales in adjacent subdivisions are going to reflect that increase in price. And that has happened with the effect of the impact fees. In many cases, the builder, he's been paying $10,000, but in actuality, when that is passed along to the seller, historically, and some data I've accumulated shows that $10,000 is $12,500. And by the time he mortgages that money and pays a mortgage over 30 years, he is adding $40,000 or $50,000 to the cost of buying a home. That is not right. And it's also misleading to tell them that it's not going to cost them very much. The announcement that it has no effect on existing property owners is misleading, because we have seen what has happened to our property values over the last 3 years. It would be interesting to say how much of that increase, and my home is doubled or tripled in price, how much it is caused by impact fees. I think, a substantial part of it. I think that has not been addressed or even looked into, and I think someone ought to consider what the effect of impact fee is on the county property values, particularly when it comes to appraisals. The appraiser must take into account the principle of substitution and what homes are selling for as are built throughout the county. For instance, 3 years ago, a car wash, to build a 5-bay car wash, the impact fee is $17,000 per bay. $17,000 for one bay. Now, no one has built a car wash since that impact fee went in, and if the price was to go up 72%, then the car wash man would pay $30,000 a bay to build a car wash. The only beneficiary of this is the existing car wash owner, who is going to raise his fees and get a substantial price increase. This is not what the intent of the impact fee is, but that is what is happening. So I ask you to be cautious. Look at the effect on the total population of the county, not just on the people moving in. It is affecting all of us. So give it some real good consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
My name is Deborah Ecker. I live at 550 Rio Mar Drive in the city of Vero Beach. I speak to you as an individual. I'm not representing any organization, but I will state my background, and that is that before retiring, I worked as an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston and also for the state of Massachusetts. And one of the projects that I worked on was developing an econometric model for forecasting revenues and expenditures for the state. So when I sat here, for me this was an educational meeting. I was very favorably impressed with the Duncan presentation, but I kept waiting to hear something about how they were going to be forecasting future expenses. And I wasn't sure until I heard Mr. Wheeler raise it, whether there was some law or some reason in that the Duncan or other calculators of impact fees were prohibited. It seems so odd. We now know that the cost of living right now, anybody who reads recent economic news, is we're facing some very stiff increases in our cost of living, primarily because of oil, as Mr. Wheeler spoke of, but also borrowing costs. Interest rates are going to go, there's every indication the interest rates are going to be increasing sharply, and that definitely impacts the county's expenditures for new infrastructure. I find I'm sorry, but I just really have to answer some of these comments that have come to you from the public, including the previous speaker, and that is that when you consider the percentage of new houses coming in that would be impacted by the fees, compared with all of the rest of us who are already here, we're the ones who are going to have increased taxes. If you keep the impact fees, remove them, some people are even saying don't even have them. If you don't have those, or if you have them unrealistically low, that's going over the mass of taxpayers, far more taxpayers. And speaking, addressing the Realtor Association, far more homeowners are going to have their price of their value of their houses impacted than just the new houses. Now, I really found Commissioner O'Brien's suggestion to be the most fruitful of all, which is that have some index which can capture these costs of interest rates and oil and cost of index. Now, there is a government, just as there is a consumer price index, there is a parallel index that is prepared by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which gives an index for government expenditures. So there are recognized indices which could be used in addition to ones that would be appropriate for this county. And so I strongly recommend you're sustaining the idea, the application of impact fees, that you endorse at least the base of what the Duncan report is, but perhaps ask them to come in with some projections on the future for the next 5 years. There are plenty of forecast analyses out there by reputable firms which could be used. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, I'm Peter Robinson from 315 Great Twig Road, Vero Beach, Florida. And, you know, I did serve on this impact fee committee, and I have to say it was, you know, enlightening. But what I'd like to talk to you about today is, you know, what you're hearing a lot of is a lot of generalizations. And I'd just like to give you some specific real-life facts. And, you know, Honey wrote her letter and said that she represents the taxpayer public, and that, you know, as representing the taxpayer public, she's concerned that if we don't raise the impact fees, it's going to hurt the taxpayer. Now, when impact fees came in, the first time they tried to pass impact fees, which goes back, this goes back into about the 50s, the first judge took a look at it, and he said, if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, then it's a duck, and it's taxes, and you can't pass impact fees. Well, eventually they got to the St. Petersburg case, and they said, okay, you can have impact fees, but you got to spend them in 7 years. Now, the first mistake we've been making in this county is we haven't been spending the money. So our first concern should not be, do we want to raise the impact fees? It ought to be, you ought to look at the page on how much money you're sitting on. You've got $60 million in your traffic account for roads that you haven't spent. A lot of that money's well over 7 years in age. You need to spend your money or somebody's going to come after it. I mean, you know, what a great class action case for a lawyer. Come on in, file suit, and try and get all that money back. You know, you need to spend that money. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we never really do is when you do your levels of service, you have examples of this is what we have, and we're going to divide it by the population or number of houses or something like that, and then that's going to be our impact fee. Well, things have changed since we go back to the St. Petersburg case, and I'll just show you how. You know, everybody, you hear all these comments about, gee, I'd like to have a place for my kids to live. You know, we're going to chase them out of here with our high prices. Well, this is from our family, you know. My son moved back here. I got another son in California, but I got one that moved back here. He finally builds a new house. Now, the kid's lived here since he was born. He's 30 years old. I don't think that's a new resident, but he is a new resident the way the impact fees work. So he pays all his impact fees. And then he finally gets his tax assessment, and he's assessed for $359,470. That's what his house is assessed for. And he pays $5,776 in taxes because he's a new resident. He's lived here all his life, but he's a new resident. That's how it works. Honey, back here, she lives in a nicer house. You know, it's valued at $500,000. It's over at the Fingers. And she pays $3,810. So every year, the new homeowner, in this case, just between these two houses, is paying, you know, about $2,000 more every year. And I can take other examples. You know, you can take, on their board, they have a Henry Blinn. His house is valued at $912,000, which is about 3 times what my son's house is valued at. And he pays $6,900 in taxes versus my son's $5,900. So this is being forgotten because in the old days, everybody, you know, your house was valued and you paid a tax based on that. But now what's happening is you're hitting people with impact fees, and then you're hitting them with higher taxes because they're the, quote, new guy on the block, even if they've lived here all their life. And part of the reason we said you need to look at leaving impact fees alone for a while is because we've got all these other forces out there that are affecting things. And just like when we talk about industry wanting to come here, we're you know, when we say, hey, we're number 2 in impact fees in the whole state, that's the last you see of them. They head out of here. And I'll tell you the other sad thing about this is I spend a lot of time talking to people that are getting foreclosed on or are trying to sell their houses on short sales. And it's a tragedy out there. They can't afford their taxes. They can't afford anything. I mean, it's a true tragedy. And raising impact fees right now, just as you hear everybody complaining about taxes, it's just a tax. You know, and we got to think about it. The other thing that we ought to feel blessed about, the other argument is that, you know, you have you have the vacant lot, for instance, that sits out there and pays taxes. Now, a vacant lot that pays taxes doesn't, you get some complaints maybe for the sheriff and some things like that, but they don't drive, they don't go anywhere, they don't do anything. 18.7% of your taxes, your tax base, is in vacant lots, according to David Nolte. He gave me this sheet today. So we're blessed by that, but we don't give any real credit for that 18.7 that keeps paying over and over again. Another example is on the school impact fee. We have a bond issue for some of the old schools. Those vacant lots pay for that bond issue. The person moves into the house, and they're still paying on the old school bond issue, but they also have to pay a school impact fee for the new schools. That's not fair. And these are just some of the issues that nobody's really answered. The other point I would make is that what happens, Joe and his group always comes in and they give you a beautiful graph and they say, look what we got to build in 20 years and we got so much money we got to spend, and we have no money. I mean, we're busted. Once Joe gets done showing you a graph, there's no money left, let me tell you. So what we really need to do is take the impact fee money, figure out what we got coming in, and figure out where we're spending it. And then we've got to spend the $60 million and be done with it. But that hasn't happened. And that's all I'm telling you is it's time to take a break on raising this until we get some real numbers and get some real expenditures. And I know your staff will jump up and Joe will say, oh no, we're going to spend it all, but we hear that every time, and in the past the number keeps growing and growing. We have a chance, because we're in a recession, to actually spend all your money, but we need to spend it now. And let me tell you the other problem I got. You build this big building, beautiful building, $50 million building. Okay, you collected over the past years the 1-cent sales tax about $110 million. $50 million on this building, $30 million on the judge's place. You could have spent some of that on roads. And then when you do build roads, guess where the roads get built first? They get built out here for your building. They get built on 41st Avenue for the Road and Bridge Department. You widen that so you can meet concurrency for Road and Bridge. But then the poor people up at 66th, when you got 41st up to 66th, they're still left with a substandard bridge. You got $60 million in impact fees. Can't you build them a decent bridge? I mean, this is what's going on in this county. And it's time to, figure out what will help the little people and not government. We don't need any more buildings. We need to help little people, and if you want to do your roads, spend your penny sales tax on it, raise your gas tax, and then use your impact fees. Thank you.
Peter, I feel compelled to correct you on a few things. First thing is that wherever you live in the state of Florida, the lot's taxed the same, and if you complain about that wrong tax structure, please talk to the legislators, because they're the ones that set it up and we abide by it.
Right, but Joe, you're missing my point. I realize you agree that that's set up by the legislator and you abide by it. All I'm saying is that the person who's coming in, who is under the law that you abide by it, is getting hit with a double whammy, and that didn't occur in the old days. So, we've got to start thinking about this as we come up with impact.
Well, you're right, but the state legislators set up the system what it is for ad valorem taxes. That's where they're getting that you're talking about, not us. We have to live within the rules they set up, so you really need to spend a lot of energy up there. The second thing is, as far as roads, you pointed out 41st. You forgot that we've done 512. You forgot we've done Indian River Boulevard. We're doing Route 60. You took a $3 million road as opposed to $120 million worth of projects we've done, and you use it as the example. And we've done all those, and those are widening for the public. And a good example is
when you built them, right?
Yes, we used sales tax and impact fees. Now, we did set aside, and this building isn't $45 million either. It's not that cost. It's $45 million for 3 buildings.
Well,
and the other thing is,
it's all for public. It's all for the public here.
Yeah.
And you got these fancy offices back behind the podium here. You got all those other pretty things.
So, that's another thing. So I think that you've got to remember we spent a lot, and we did have about 100 $10 million a year ago in roads. Our balances are going down because we've just bid out 512, the last phase. We're doing phase 3, phase 4, 512. We've got Oslo underway. We've got 53rd Street. So that money is going to, and then if I didn't have it, thank goodness I had it, because we wouldn't be able to widen Route 60 and help developers out so they can keep concurrency. We don't like concurrency any more than anyone else does. That's another state law. So if you guys want that to change, you need to spend a lot of time with the state, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to live in the rules they give us also.
Concurrency is a state law, but it's also set by our land use plan. And we make a determination what our level of services are going to be. Many of the counties have taken areas like State Road 60, which are state roads, and said, we're not going to deal with that, and left it out of their concurrency plan. We have that option if we want to. That's a decision that could be made right here.
We could probably make that decision. We've decided that we should widen the road. We're going to send the money. We're going to give the money up ahead so they can get down for our community, and they're going to pay us back. But we couldn't do that if we hadn't been responsible and set money aside. We wouldn't be able to do that. And down the road, you'd have huge problems for builders and developers.
Well, but it's once again, it's the county's decision as to where they're going to set those levels of service. And that's what we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Okay.
Hi, I'm Don Wright, Sebastian. I was a participant on the impact fee study and actually wrote the section on parks and recreation. I have some real problems with the way the consultants do their reports, and I would compare it to driving a car by looking out of the back window. Everything they do is historical. I would like to remind you that the impact fee law basically said it needs to be proportionate to the need, and it needs to provide a benefit for the new resident. I think that this whole system that they use in not defining specifically what that need is and how much it's going to cost for specific projects is a major flaw in the way the study is done. I do have some general comments for you. I met with another individual this morning who's losing his house to foreclosure. He was employed in the construction industry. So we're going to do a short sale, and he's actively looking at moving either out of the state of Florida or out of Indian River County. This is an epidemic. If you watch the news yesterday, Governor Christ was commenting about the fact that the economy in Florida is in an economic meltdown. We're not far from that in Indian River County. And the construction industry, which has been the backbone of the economy for the last few years, does not have adequate jobs available. Here's what some other communities are doing, and I don't necessarily think that's a recommendation for a solution for Indian River County, but I think it was very interesting. St. Lucie County has adopted a position where they are going to eliminate commercial impact fees for targeted commercial businesses. Now, they've done that, and you can't, under the law, theoretically, not pay impact fees. But what they've done is they're offsetting the impact fees by paying those through another fund. So I don't want to get hung up on the legal statement that you can't offset impact fees. You can find a way around it so that you can collect them and then have them paid some other way. And they're doing this for obvious reasons and to encourage job growth and commercial industrial growth. Volusia County, similar report to the one that we have. The county commissioners voted for no increase in impact fees. Martin County, a similar report to the one we have. They voted for no increase in impact fees initially, and then subsequently added a provision for some school impact fees. Most recently, I think you'd be interested in what Highland County is doing. And Highland County is looking at a substantial economic stimulus package for their county. And that would involve suspending all impact fees, suspending all building permit fees, suspending all landfill fees and taking extremely aggressive steps to promote construction and business development in their community. So I think once you've completed your evaluation of the impact fees, that does not go anywhere near far enough. What you should be looking at seriously are some emergency meetings to establish some economic stimulus packages for Indian River County to stop the decline in the economy here. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Just what you just said about Highlands County, if they're encouraging more development and they've suspended impact fees, how are they going to keep the infrastructure up with the growth they're going to experience unless they have a backlog of roads? I know 35 years ago when I moved here, I couldn't imagine why anybody had spent the money to 4-lane Route 60. But obviously, somebody was thinking ahead. But I just wonder, how are they where's the money going to come from to build the infrastructure if they don't have impact fees?
I don't have the answer to that, Gary, because I don't have the answer to all of these things, but what they're doing is an emergency economic stimulus package to get people back to work and get something going in the construction and economic development area there. I am guessing that, there are going to be some fees that they take out of their regular tax base to support this, which would not surprise me. But, the money has to come from somewhere. But I am very, very concerned that the economy in Indian River County is following the economy in the rest of the state of Florida, and something should be done about it on an emergency basis. And you are the people that have that obligation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon. I'm Joseph Paladin. I'm the president of Black Swan Consulting, and I also was a part of the task force that brought that report forward. A couple of brief statements. Number one, and I don't know what the answer is to Gary's question either, and I don't know if that is the answer, but there are 32 counties that don't have impact fees. So there's different types of use impacts or different types of use fees that they incur. I haven't done a real extensive study on it, just to make that statement. Going back to what Chuck Meckling said, on that Tyndall-Oliver report that we looked at a couple years ago, we all agreed sitting at that table that those numbers and the rationale for those numbers were flawed, and we couldn't justify them. There's no one that didn't agree with that at that time, and still no one doesn't disagree with that. So if you start out with a flawed analysis and you build from that flawed number, it's impossible to come out with an educated statement that this is what we should have. And I'm saying we need to go back to that original report and break it apart and analyze it, and not only say it's flawed, but point out how it's flawed, and then start with a real solid number that we all know is real. Now, the last time impact fees came forward to be raised, I supported that, 100%. Other developers and builders in the area, including Chuck, we all supported the increase because we saw the justification for it at the time. And with the business the way it was going and knowing that growth was coming on so fast and we needed the infrastructure in ahead of time, we all supported it because we thought it was best for our county. Now, it's a totally different situation. It's not what's best for our county. Whether or not we raise an impact fee today, probably ain't going to have much basis on how many houses we build tomorrow because of the backlog of houses. That's true. But I think one of the things that we did when we raised the impact fees last time, and I'm guilty of it, we didn't realize the effect that raising the impact fees on housing was going to have on commercial development. At least I didn't, and most people I talked to didn't. We didn't understand the cumulative effect that was going to have on business construction. And see, I think that's something we need to go back and look at. And through our report, we said we wanted to look at new avenues, look at new progressive ways. Some of that you say concurrency has nothing to do with impact fees. Well, it sort of does. Because if there's new ways of figuring concurrency, if there's new ways of analyzing how you increase your level of service in your concurrency at a less costly manner of doing it, it's simple to say, okay, 2 lanes give you so many trips, 4 lanes give you 1,700 trips, so 6 lanes give you 2,800 trips. So you just keep adding lanes, and you add lanes after lanes after lanes, and that isn't really an intelligent way in the 21st century to analyze how you want to go forward and develop the county. There's other things we can look at, which we all analyze in our report: synchro, collecting lanes, right turn lanes, left turn lanes, various other things that might give you concurrency at less cost, which then would balance out at what your cost of impact would be for that number of trips. So there's other ways of looking at it. And as far as the consultants we hire and all, like I said, the Duncan methodology, I just can't really analyze that and tell them they're wrong. I can't tell you they're 100% right, but I can tell you based on the Tyndall Oliver report, it can't possibly come out right. And I kind of look at it like an appraiser. You have a contract on a house, so you have to get an appraisal. Your contract's $380,000. I can guarantee you your appraisals are usually going to come in somewhere between $370,000 and $390,000. You're not going to get one for $800,000. You're not going to get one for $200,000. So these guys showed these graphs up here. None of you all want to be at the bottom. You don't want them to stand here and say, hey, you guys are the lowest county in the whole state on impact fees. So we hire them to get us an analysis that we're comfortable with. You don't want to be at the exact highest, but we all want to be close to there. So these graphs is sort of like an appraisal. It's a feel-good number that you're somewhere in between, so you can't be 100% wrong, you can't be 100% right. I think we need to hold off on this impact fee thing until we can set back and look at these numbers we started with. Give me a solid justification of that number basis, and then build from that. And I'm the last person that doesn't want to have enough impact fees to pay for infrastructure. And as far as our county goes, we've never used a penny of ad valorem tax to subsidize any sort of infrastructure. It's all been done through impact fees. So we're a pretty good county, and Joe Bear's done a heck of a good job. And I think we need to just look at these numbers before we build from those numbers. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Anyone?
I'm Brian Curley. I live at 4101 Ocean Drive. I'm going to reiterate some stuff said earlier, so I'll try to keep it brief. I was asked recently to join a non-for-profit organization to build affordable housing. I was told, and I can verify, that there are 1,000 families looking for affordable housing in this county. And certainly they're not looking at probably any of the houses that are for sale on the market right now. By raising these impact fees, you know, we're not going to stimulate or affect growth. What we're going to do is eventually price some of these people needing affordable housing out of the market. You know, I wish I had better numbers, but just let's think about it logically. And I look at it as, you know, as being a developer myself, that impact fees is going to become a line item that eventually needs to be paid by the end consumer. Now, people said earlier, just have the developer pay for it. It doesn't work that way. That cost is passed along to the end user, just the same as the cost of the cement, the steel, everything. It's going to go to those people, and it's going to prevent them from buying affordable housing. So I'm sure your minds have already been made one way or the other, and I realize that there are certain things for affordable housing where they delay impact fees. But keep in mind, if you do vote for the increase, just try to come up with ways to make sure that affordable housing and also any economic growth for new people wanting to open up shops, because this affects commercial people as well. Just keep that in mind if you do vote for impact fees, that these people need to be helped. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Said the magic words, affordable housing. Andy Bowler, Indian River Habitat for Humanity, and unfortunately probably the largest builder of homes in the county at the moment. We have 24 homes under construction. We plan to build over 40 this year. And you all know what we're going to say here, but just to reiterate and put it on the record, obviously we are against any increase in the impact fees. They are high enough as it is at the moment for our clients. And as you know, we've had to raise our window of opportunity for our homeowners from 25% of the AMI to 30%, and raise the upper limit of the people that we accept into our program from 50% of AMI to 60%, purely because of the increased costs of just doing business here, as well as the taxes and the insurance that our homeowners are facing. So for those that are in the affordable housing market, the workforce housing, if you like, things are tough as it is. And so I would strongly recommend that you do not raise impact fees. And yes, we are the beneficiaries, or our homeowners are the beneficiaries of the SHIP program, State Housing Initiative Partnership Program. However, that money is very tight. It's getting tighter each year, as the song will tell you. And with the state cutbacks in taxation, they're going to try and raid the various trust funds that SHIP money is being held in. And so it's going to get even more and more difficult. So I appreciate it if you would hold the line. If you do have to raise it, though, as many of you know, my position on that is if we have a sliding scale whereby homes below 1,500 square feet or 1,300 square feet, for that matter, could be exempted out of any increase. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Oh, my goodness, you have a lot of paperwork there.
That's scary. They make fun of me because this is the file.
We need a break.
From our meetings for the impact fee that I've collected. That's all the paperwork.
Can we have your name, please?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry. My name's Chip Landers. I was the realtor representative on the impact fee committee, and I'm a fourth-generation resident of this county. I'm sorry Wesley's not here to hear that. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of study that went into what we were asked to do. It was a tough task. It was very eye-opening. There's a lot of good information that the consultants reported and presented to us, and what I found out was there was a lot of science to it. There was smart to it. The consultants currently didn't necessarily agree with all of the Tyndale Oliver report, so we can see there's a difference of opinion there. And now I see for their presentation that there's also, you all called it revenue neutral proposal. Is that what it was called? And I'm a little slow sometimes, but as I understand that, what did that do to the impact fees if that was approved from the current impact fees? How much would it raise it?
I mean, the fees would be basically the same. They'd just be based on the new study. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, that was enlightening as well. So there is some suggestions there from even your own consultants. I made a comment through some of the meetings that I work in Real World 101, whether it's clients that I work with, developers that I talk to, and my own personal situation at this point in time. I'm a current taxpayer. I pay a lot of money. I'm going to be a new taxpayer because I'm going to be building a house shortly. And one of the discussions that I've had with my builder is that if these fees are raised, that's $11,000 that comes out of your budget that I'll have to pay, that I will not pay to a subcontractor, that I'll do something differently. I will not do some things that I wanted to do on the house. So that's Real World 101. That means that contractor will not get that job. They will not pay those sales taxes. Those employees will not do that job again. That's Real World 101. That's what these impact fees do. That's one item. We talked about the nominal increases to some people. And $11,000 is not a ton of money to some people. What that means in Real World 101 to somebody at a $200,000 house is about $70 a month, $800 a year, $20,000 for the life of the loan. So it doubles. $70 a month is not a ton of money, but it is money. So please consider that for those homeowners. Mr. Bowler spoke here on behalf of Habitat for Humanity. That's something very dear to my heart. I've worked on several of their houses and supported as much as I could. There is a suggestion from the state impact fee committee review force that affordable housing be excluded. So it's not a new idea. We have a process where our impact fees are adjusted based on the size of the house. So there's some of those creative ideas we talked about. Mr. O'Brien had, a creative idea as well. And one of the main things that came out of our last meeting for the impact fee task force was to have a continuing committee to look at creative ideas.
I think there's a lot out there that we're just not looking hard enough at, and we haven't had to. But anybody that's been in business the last 2 years, especially in the real estate industry, you're looking at everything in a different light. County's going to be looking at it in a different light here shortly as well, with revenue shortfalls. Makes you get a lot more creative. And we talk, and I hear a lot of times, well, you know, the taxpayers should not have to pay for it. Builders are taxpayers. New homeowners are taxpayers, and probably existing taxpayers. So everybody is going to pay for this in one way or another. I sat on the school board subcommittee along with Ms. Offit, Mr. McIntyre, and I know that the impetus behind moving this along earlier than the 3-year time frame was suggested was by the school board. You have 2 letters from the school board telling you they do not want these increased impact fees at this point in time. So that'll muddy the water again. The passionate appeal that we all have right now is that this is the wrong time to be doing this. It's a very onerous stumbling block that we have for our local economy right now, that we don't need any additional, to quote Mr. Meckley, nails in the coffin. It can make a difference to people that are out there. They're trying to afford a new home, whether they qualify or not. And regarding the comments from the impact fee, the consultants, that reducing these fees would not, it's probably me.
Is that you?
Off. So, I guess new phone, sorry. Reducing these fees would not increase growth. Depends how much you reduce them. I'm not suggesting that, but I can guarantee you that we'd have a lot more building in Weber County than you would in St. Lucie County if you reduce your fees down to nothing. But the other side of that logic is, if you increase them too much, yes, you will slow growth or stop growth. That's real world 101. And if these fees are looking to be increased to stop or slow growth, which I certainly hope is not the case, that's why you have concurrency. You have school concurrency now too. So regarding the schools that are out there, that's what will control growth. I hope that you all consider all of the facts that are out there, and I know that you will. I know that you're listening to everything that's said by all parties, and look at your current situation. Don't price us out of the market, because if you do, that individual will not build that home, and you're not going to get the impact fees anyways. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon. Victor DiMaria, 29 Sailfish Road, Vero Beach. I'm an engineer. I won't tell anybody your taxes, and I'm appalled that someone did. I consider that a personal attack, and I really resent that in these chambers. We heard some excellent engineering facts brought out today. We heard some heartfelt feelings brought out. I'd like to review some of the facts. Impact fees are a one-time capital charge for new development. They are a fee for capacity. They are a fee proportional to benefit. That's pretty clear. Thank you, Bob. It's very easy to understand. The person who gets the benefit pays the fee. We had some objective professional analysis by a very large, very reputable, very experienced engineering organization. I am a professional engineer, and I have done large studies, and I find it a little bit untowardly to challenge an organization such as that as an individual. We all have our strengths and our weaknesses, and we have personal opinions. Opinions are opinions, facts are facts, professional analysis is professional analysis. There is objective analysis. That's what engineers, professional engineers do in a study such as this. There is subjective analysis, and that's what we all do when we're considering our own needs and our own impact of the analysis. Don't discard the difference between the two analyses. We've heard talk of creative solutions. And certainly I have heartfelt requests that you get creative with frugality, but don't get creative with whose people you use to spend bills. The fact is that a large portion of what goes into roads is gasoline taxes, it's sales taxes. They come from everyone as it is right now. They are not part of it. They pay for the benefit that new development gets. If we underprice what we have for impact fees, that means that's the burden of the taxpayers who are here and who are paying for the development for their own consumption and for past consumption that was not paid for. I encourage you to use prudent application of fees and not subsidize a special interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Excuse me, Richard Bialowski, Oyster Shell Lane, Vero Beach. First of all, just want to talk quantum mechanics here for a moment and make the point that the Heisenberg uncertainty principle proved long ago that there's no such thing as objective observation. You know, the last time this consultant report was developed, the consultant very nicely ended by saying he would apologize for going over our heads with all the math. And so, you know, being insulted a bit by that, I went back and I've been studying advanced math, and I want to give you a little example of that. 100% of zero is zero, and that's where we stand right now. So, you know, raising the fees right now doesn't really accomplish very much for the county. We're in a situation where, I mean, I've laid off people recently. I've told people to stop on certain contracts. It's not a good feeling because, you know, that affects their lives. It's real. It's, you know, it affects putting bread on their table. It affects paying their mortgage, which it's not a good time to be talking about anything that's another nail in the coffin. As somebody told me today, he said, you know, it's like, you know, weekly beatings will continue until morale improves. And, you know, I think that's what we're feeling here a little bit. I won't, every time someone proposes to increase impact fees, I promise I won't get up and say we shouldn't increase impact fees. I just think the timing is wrong. And I remember quite a few years ago when there was a discussion about having a moratorium. I remember everyone said, we have too much growth. We have to stop everything so we can talk about where we're going to go and how we're going to deal with all these issues. Well, guess what, folks? We got a moratorium right now, and where's this discussion on what we're going to do? And this relates to this aspect that your committee came back and said we need to be creative, because these impact fees all relate essentially to the concept of sprawl and a certain kind of development. And as Joe very clearly said, you know, widening the lanes creates certain kinds of impacts. They're sort of self-perpetuating. We need to go back and look at this whole thing holistically. It's a good time. It's a good opportunity to do that. Nothing really is happening. If, God forbid, we don't increase the impact fees right now, and that stimulates somebody to do a little something and puts somebody to work and puts some bread on somebody's table, well, hallelujah. Let's not worry about that. We can worry about that in the future, hopefully in the not too distant future. But right now, let's just not jump. I mean, they made the point, the consultant made the point that decreasing or increasing these fees didn't seem to have much of an economic impact on certain counties. I'm curious if the consultant has ever gone into a county and done a study and come to the conclusion that the fees should be lowered. Has that ever happened? Did those counties hire you again?
Yeah, it's honest.
I'm just curious. I'm trying to get you guys where you live a little bit, because you're getting all of us where we live a little bit.
No.
It's just a bad time in the market. I don't have any problem with development carrying its own weight. I think it's the right thing to do. It's just a bad time. So, hopefully everyone can hold their fire, and we'll address this hopefully in a year, maybe in 2 years, maybe in 3. The sooner the better. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Greetings, Commissioners. I'm Ann Reuter. I'm a member of the Indian River County School Board, and I've lived in Vero Beach on the same street for 37 years. Well, I have definitely paid my share of taxes here. I'm speaking for myself, not for the school board, although I want to mention a few things the school board has done. We were asking where this money is going to come from to build these roads in the future if the impact fees are not increased. Here's an example, and Peter Robertson alluded to it earlier. Our daughter moved back to Vero and bought a house. The house had taxes of under $4,000. The taxes now are over $8,000. You have an impact fee already on the people who are purchasing homes in Vero Beach, whether they're brand new homes or their existing homes. They start over with their taxes. We also bought a new house. We've been here all our lives, and we bought a new house and had started over on our taxes too. The school board is really worried about the economy. We have had to build one classroom and hire one teacher for every 2 existing classrooms because of class size reduction, at least that high. That's been huge, and that's with flat growth. It'd be nice if we could use the impact fees to do this, but that's not what it's supposed to be for. It's not supposed to be for class size reduction. It's supposed to be for new growth. The school board has also put a freeze on non-instructional hiring. They've also just shifted to initiating zero-based budgeting. We're very worried that we won't have the funds that need to go into each individual classroom. We don't know what the impact is going to be on this new, the new tax homestead exemption amendment. But you can still bet there'll be huge inequities in what one person pays and the neighbor pays. So anytime someone buys a new house or a new anything, they're going to start over in their tax base. I think that is impact fee enough, especially for the economy as it is right now. I think we're just pouring salt in wounds. So, appreciate you letting your time. Thank you.
Thank you. We're winding down now. Anyone else like to speak? That's okay.
My name's David Etter. I live on Seahawk Lane in Vero Beach. One thing was a little scary. I'm following my business partner, Richard Bylowski, and he's sitting over there. I'm sitting here, and I think he stole my notes. But I would like to make a couple comments based on other people's comments. I do represent the taxpayers of Indian River County. Last year, we paid about $145,000 on taxes on our property that had no police coverage, no schools, nobody using any of the roads. Actually, I drive to the properties once a week to look at them, so there is a road impact. And I'm very concerned about the existing property owner's tax burden. The other comment I have to comment on is I have a background in finance and economics and construction and engineering. And the one thing I can tell you is economic analysis, such as all sides over here have done, is not engineering. There is a huge difference. I can get 5 structural engineers to look at the beams up there, look at the tables, and they're all going to agree on load factors. I can get 5 economics professors or practitioner economics people to look at the same facts, and I'm probably going to get 10 different answers. And that is probably a structural reality. But like my partner said, Now is not really the time. 2 of our subcontractors have gone bankrupt. I have to return a phone call to an unemployment office for one of our employees that filed for unemployment not long ago. There is a grinding down, and now is the time during our de facto moratorium to sit back and look at what we really want for the county and the patterns of growth and sprawl, because that's going to have the biggest future impact on impact fees out there. If we build out the county according to the comp plan now with current densities and zoning and we spread it out, the impact fees for the roads, police, parks, as we do that, are going to be astronomical. Whereas if we step back, look at what we want in the future, condense things within the urban service line, and really think about future patterns and growth and what makes sense and what is sustainable, now's the time to do it. And that's going to have the greatest future impact on fees that we have. I encourage you not to take too much action now, because now is not the time. We've also lost one contract for building actually a high-end house on the beach, where we went through all the costs, and my construction costs for building a relatively high-end house on the beach are down about 20% from 2 years ago. And I can get crews to actually come out and work on them. But we added up all the costs with the prospective buyer, went through everything, went through the financing, and then added in the impact fees. And that's when he just threw up his hands and said, you know, this is just out of control, crazy, and decided to not build the house. So even the existing impact fees do have an impact. That doesn't help the county. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, do I have any more speakers?
Please, I'll follow you.
Okay, come on.
Somebody step up or we'll close it.
Oh, you're talking like Sandra now.
Yeah.
Golly.
Good afternoon, commissioners and staff and consultants. I think you've done a fine job, and I, as a taxpayer in Indian River County, appreciate it. Thank you. My name is Ital Varone. I live at 280 Pepper Tree Drive in Indian River Shores, and I do support the impact fee increase, particularly as that relates to residential development. If we did less than increase this, it would appear to me to be just another form of corporate subsidy or corporate welfare. I don't agree with that. I don't even agree with the subsidizing of ag land or of the sugar industry.
I would like to correct that. Ag land, citrus doesn't get any subsidy, never has. Sugar does. But for the record, I want to make that.
It was my impression that ag land also gets tax considerations.
We don't get subsidies. I think that's what
But rather than making that a debate, I don't agree with subsidies for these kind of industries. I do believe that the economic model for Florida and Indian River County has probably been flawed in that it's been based upon residential growth, which has been proven not to be sustainable. So we have to look at new areas of growth. Areas like down south are looking at the biotech, things like that will create good jobs and sustainable jobs. Now, another thing I would like to mention is not intended to cast differences that might or might not have been said, and I certainly, with all due respect, I have many friends in the developer community which suggest this. I was told by a developer sitting in this very chamber that developers expect a margin, this was in the good years, of as much as 55% on their development projects. 55%. And that developer is sitting here. That may be believable because if you read the newspaper, the Sunday newspaper, you all get this, and it always talks about these sales or these discounts. And here we have homes where you can save $87,900, and that ranges up to $140,000 on multiple projects throughout the county. Now, my point is merely this. If these projects carry that much margin in them, certainly developers can somehow absorb some of the impact rather than, quote, pass it on. And I believe that certainly in these times, they may have to look at doing that. The other thing that I would want to comment on is what we have today was supposed to have been tested way back at the time that Caroline Ginn was sitting in your chair. And she proposed what she called an interim moratorium. And that was voted down by commissioners not sitting here today. And what she was really looking for was the time to really assess where we needed to go in terms of development, in terms of impact fees, et cetera. That didn't happen. So what we do have now is what many people are disturbed by, which are vacant lots, trees pushed down, piles of dirt, no construction going forward, and again, on the basis of a flawed start in all aspects of development, including impact fees. So I would hope that you all remember your pledge as you came to office, and I know at least 4 of you did say that you believe impact fees, new construction, new residential construction, had to pay for itself. I believe that was valid then, and I think it's valid now. The exceptions I would take to that would obviously be on affordable housing, and I certainly think that there were some very convincing arguments here today on the issue of commercial and industrial. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
I got a call yesterday. I was out of town. I was supposed to be out of town today, and I got a call from Chuck. He said, "Wayne, you got to come back here and say your piece." So I'm back here. First, for benefits. Let's talk about benefits. One half of the
Sorry,
home.
name for your...
Wayne Kleinsteiger, 4088th Place, and I did make a presentation to the impact fee study group. I'm in commercial real estate. My primary business is arranging financing for developments, large developers, and I know a little bit about the numbers, and I also know a little bit about the risks. But that's being left aside. One half of the homes in Indian River County were built before we had impact fees. Most of those homes are located in zip codes 32963, 32960, and 32958. So now the next question is, how many of those homeowners are benefiting from some of the infrastructure being put in by those impact fees that have been putting infrastructure in this county, like State Road 60, for example, that they use to get out of here when we have a hurricane. So I'd say that a lot of the people in the county benefit from the infrastructure that these impact fees pay for. Now, one of the things that I did for this group is I have several development models. And I have them for commercial projects, and I have them for residential subdivisions. And the way they work is that you start the sales price and you take all the costs and you go back and back and back, and what's left over is how much you can afford to pay for the dirt to build that project. And I think everybody was really astounded when I put those models up there, that those dirt numbers are red with little brackets around them. Example. I'm looking here at one of our local projects, Point West. There's an office building, 3,634 square feet that they like to build. I'm looking at all the costs and all the impact fees and so forth. And the cost just for the construction, it would take a rent of about $22.41 a square foot, triple net, just to recover the capital cost of the vertical construction. I haven't even thrown the land in yet. The market rent today for that project is $15 a square foot triple net, so what do you think the value of that dirt is? And I suspect that if I went over this whole county and made those same analysis, there would be some real adjustments downward of land values at this point in time. Now, if you throw impact fees on there, I did a little study there too, that represents in this particular little project about $90,000 of value that would be in there because of the capitalization of the NOI and so on and so forth, that would be as a result of impact fees that reduces the value. So, as I listen to every presentation today, I come to one conclusion. You have your study, and it focuses on one of the issues that we have, and that's how we pay for infrastructure and so forth going forward. However, that's only one view, and I've heard hundreds of other views here that talk about other impacts of economic impacts on this community that I don't think have really been considered in a total equation, and I think those also need to be analyzed as part of this whole decision-making process. And I think at the end of the day, it's probably not timely today to be thinking about raising impacts at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, we close that part of the meeting, and there is a final phase of questions and answers. We've had a lot of good speakers. We all appreciate everyone taking this part of their day to come out and express themselves. This community really does care about each other, and we are really trying to find a way to balance everything. And that's why we hire the experts. So the question is, from all of us, because we'll have to be making a decision at some point, is trying to fairly balance this. And this is rain coming down right here, which is gold for some people, but for other people it's, you can't do your work. So it's a balance. And we would like for you to put any more input in writing to us that you can after hearing everything. I do think we're in somewhat of an anomaly. We have not been in this state of finances or lack of finances in this state, this city, this county, or this country. And none of us are really comfortable with the position we're looking forward. So with that, any commissioners, any last thoughts? I'll start at your end.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I just have some comments and some suggestions for staff going forward. First of all, Ms. Reuter and Mr. Landers both referred to new home prices paying higher property tax because of the Save Our Homes discrepancy. And I think I'd like to point out in that comparison that I believe the old homes are underpaying their fair share because of the Save Our Homes. The new prices are coming in at fair market value. We've lowered our millage rate. They're probably coming at their fair cost of a property tax, and the older Save Our Homes are probably underpaying their property tax. Mr. Paladin, on your comment about impact fees paying for all infrastructure, Jason put together a sheet for me on a lot of our road projects, and impact fees are only paying, on average, about 50% of the cost of road widenings. 58th Avenue from Oslo to State Road 60, only 15% came from impact fees. The current 512 Phase 3 is high, it's 88%. Phase 4 is only 62%. So impact fees are not paying for all of our infrastructure improvements. I had the same newspaper supplement as Mr. Verone. Part of my concern is the builders aren't coming in and building what would be an affordable home. Okay, they're coming in with 4,000 square foot homes, priced in the 300s to 400,000s. You know, if everybody was coming in at a $125,000 home, I'd say, okay, well, the impact fee will have a big hit. But the builders are coming in with these kind of homes. I'm not 100% sold that $8,000 more on a $300,000 home is a deal breaker. Mr. Wise, impact fees did not cause the increase in everybody's home prices. We had a perfect storm of record low interest rates, an upcoming baby boomer retirement, and a speculative real estate market that drove all the home prices up to the levels they're at. I don't support lowering or level of service standards. I think it's what makes Indian River County unique. It separates us from the rest of Florida. It's what makes us special. So however we figure this out going forward, I don't want to see us lowering our level of service standards. Mr. Butel seemed to think I had made my mind was already made up, and I don't believe my mind is made up at this point. I don't think that a temporary pause or freeze in the current impact fees would be subsidizing any new development, because as we've all heard, there's no new development going on right now. My big concern was that the methodology we're using right now does not allow us to move or adjust those impact fees in a timely manner, either up or down, to take into account the current market conditions and the costs involved to provide that infrastructure. So I made an earlier suggestion as maybe a different way of looking at this that would allow us to adjust these fees in a more timely manner. And I would still like to see that idea pursued, where we sit down and agree on the methodology and then use some of the appropriate indexes to adjust those fees as prices change in a more timely manner. I agree with Mr. Meckling. I don't think that the state road pricing should be included when we look at traffic costs of construction. That's the one thing we've heard consistently, is that state projects are considerably higher than locally funded projects. Those are very rare. The State Road 60 is a very rare occurrence, and I would like to see us just use our normal county costs of building and maintaining county roads to be used as part of that cost figure. There was another report referring to the proportionate share of impact fees, where the smaller the home, generally there's fewer people in the home, meaning fewer impacts on the infrastructure. And going along with the affordable housing, I would like to see, instead of 3 categories, a 4-category breakdown, dropping the lower level to less than 1,200 square feet. And these are numbers, obviously they're open to debate. These are just what I had jotted down. So the first category would be less than 1,200 square feet and have a lower proportionate impact fee. 1,200 to 2,000, 2,000 to 2,800, and then greater than 2,800. And the impact fees would be staggered proportionally based on size and estimated population use of that size home. And I've said many times, and I concur with several of the speakers who brought this up, that we just desperately need to reevaluate how we assess particularly traffic impact fees to our commercial and industrial and retail development. When we look at a residential impact, we assign a certain number of trips to that residence, and at 1,500 to 2,500 square feet, the report says it's 9.57 daily trips. Somewhere in those 9.57 daily trips, I believe, is a trip to the bank, is a trip to the grocery store, is a trip to the job site, is a trip to the school, is a trip to the dry cleaner, the pizza place. And so when we come down and then assign additional trips when we put in that commercial or industrial infrastructure, I think we're definitely double dipping there. I think a very good example is the new Indian River National Bank branch on 27th Avenue. I do not see that creating one single new trip. I see it reallocating a lot of existing trips. I see a lot of people that may have lived south of Oslo, instead of having to drive up to State Road 60, now only have to drive right to Oslo. So I see a lowering of the impact on our roads. So I think we need to take a look at all those type of uses and really look at it and say, is this really increasing a trip? And even if we say, okay, it's a new branch, it's going to add 6 trips because of the people that work there, Well, that trip to drive to work should be captured in that residential number, that 9.57. So I would like to see a very concentrated effort, both from staff, the consultants, and the members in the community, that we just really need to take a real hard look at those commercial industrial impacts, because I believe they are double dipping, and it's not currently fair how we assess that, and it is a deterrent to future business and development and growth in the county. At the same time, if we capture that at the residential level, then I think we've captured it there. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fletcher?
I'll attempt to be a little briefer. I appreciate everyone's comments on, obviously, both sides of the barometer, for taking the time. I'm not going to offer opinion upon opinions that were voiced here. I do have two comments, that this assessment, this examination of our impact fees has been done by schedule. It's an automatic, and the timing could not be worse for assessing and deciding upon our impact fees. This has to be done. I appreciate all of your work. The results are rather intimidating, and I do share concerns of those numbers that, while some are saying will indicate or alleviate some of the burden on taxes, I feel they are so high in projection that they will adversely increase taxation, because whatever little positive growth that we have here in the community will be limited to none. I am aware of some examples that have happened in Indian River County over the past year, and one specifically on a site, there was a banking institution that was seeking to build in Indian River County, and I believe it was going to bring some jobs into Indian River County, and their impact fees were slightly over $300,000, and they built up in Brevard, where the impact fees were slightly over $40,000 for the same building. So maybe we're doing something wrong. We're not encouraging enough positive, mechanized, enhanced, industrial, commercial growth, and that's what we're all seeking, because if we don't, we will not have the residents to be concerned with. I believe now, I don't know if I stand corrected, we probably have about 4,000 homes in multiple listing. Is that about accurate?
Your sales, we've had another keeping track, that's back to 1988.
So I don't think we're in the development mode right now. Again, we're here for this assessment, and it's mechanized because it was due. It was all about timing, was it not, Mr. Baird?
Yes, it was actually required by what we had in our ordinance that the school wanted to address it at this time. So we had to address it, and that's why we hired a consultant.
So this is not about need. This is about the fact that it was just due.
Okay.
No further. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Wheeler?
Well, I think Commissioner O'Brien said about everything that needed to be said. The only two things that I would add to that is that one of the statements was made that the older homes benefit from the new roads being built because of impact fees, and is that fair for hurricane evacuation? Well, if you didn't have the new growth and the new homes, you wouldn't need the new roads, and the old roads worked just fine for evacuation prior to all of the growth. The second thing that I would point out is that not only the problems we have here in a bad situation is the weaker dollar. I mean, for the first time in, I don't know, probably 15 or 20 years, the Canadian dollar is worth more than the U.S. dollar. It's weaker all over the world, and we're in a world market, and we're competing for the same concrete, the same oil, the same gas, a lot of the same building supplies, even if they're manufactured in this country. We're still competing with overseas places that want to buy our product. So the cost of everything, I think, is, for the next few years, is going to escalate, and there you have the inflation factor, and I'm concerned about, what we do in this county to keep up the best we can. So I think that there's been a lot of good points made today on both sides. I also think there's been some mixing impact fees with property taxes. I know Mr. Robinson and Mrs. Reuter, when they mentioned that and government gets hammered all the time for this inequity in the tax system. And for those who care, it wasn't the government that created this inequity. It was the voters of the state of Florida when they passed Save Our Homes. And I remember Mr. Naldi going around and telling the average person that the people that are going to benefit from this are the people that live on golf courses and waterfront, because they have the expensive homes and they're locked in at the 3%. And but that's where the inequity in our tax system come in, with Save Our Homes back in the 90s when that was passed by the voters. And then what just happened with Amendment 1 may have even contributed even more to inequity in the taxes. And the only reason I say that is to keep the impact fee, which is for a specific benefit to someone, separate from the taxes, where most taxes, unfortunately, and I want to say unfortunately by government, are based on one's ability to pay rather than a good legitimate reason for raising taxes. But the impact fees are for benefit, and I just want to make sure that we keep impact fees and taxes separate. They're both an economic drain, and I know, Peter, what your point was, but that at all costs. But anyway, those are my only two comments. I think Peter, and unlike Peter, probably the only thing that I would look at differently at this point is, as Ms. Offit said, is look at level of service. If we want to reduce level of service and reduce an impact fee by reducing that level of service, that's something I'd consider. But somebody's got to pay the bill when they come due, and the money's got to come from someplace. And rather than looking at the possibility in the future of dipping into ad valorem tax, which we haven't done, I'd rather see level of service in some areas, possibly at least look at them to see what we could do. But those are my comments.
Thank you. This is a workshop, and we take no action at a workshop, but this certainly will be coming back to all five of us in the near future, and I will take everything under consideration and try my very best to be level-headed and a clear thinker on this. And I thank you, gentlemen, for coming. And do you have any last thoughts?
Just how about the ladies?
What?
About the ladies?
I don't see any right here.
Oh, these gentlemen.
Yes.
Oh, it's been a long day.
It is. Okay, thank you very much. This meeting is closed.